For centuries, humanity has looked to the skies and seen more than just stars. Strange battles above medieval cities, glowing orbs chasing warplanes, rockets that vanish into lakes, and disks that hover silently over towns. These are the mysteries that have haunted our history long before the modern UFO era began. From the celestial wonders of Nuremberg and Basel to the Foo Fighters of World War II to the ghost rockets of Sweden, each sighting brought us closer to the dawn of a new age of sky mysteries. And then, in 1947, everything changed. Kenneth Arnold sighting, Roswell, Washington, D.C., and countless other encounters defined what we now call the UFO phenomenon. This is the journey through the early classic UFO sightings, the first 30 cases that shaped the world's greatest mystery. Subscribe now, and let's uncover the skies together. The Kenneth Arnold sighting, the birth of flying saucers. On the afternoon of June 24, 1947, a lone pilot cut across the skies of Washington state. He was searching for nothing more unusual than a downed military aircraft. But what Kenneth Arnold claimed to have seen that day would ripple across the globe, reshaping culture, sparking controversy, and giving birth to the modern age of UFOs. This is the story of the Kenneth Arnold sighting, a moment when the sky itself became a mystery. Setting the scene, Kenneth Arnold was not a man easily dismissed. Born in Minnesota in 1915, he had built a career as a respected businessman and was an experienced private pilot. By 1947, aviation was still a relatively young endeavor, demanding discipline, sharp reflexes, and a calm mind. On that June day, Arnold was flying his single-engine Call Air A-2 over the Cascade Mountains. His plan was straightforward: assist in the search for a lost U.S. Marine transport plane that had gone down near Mount Rainier. Conditions were clear. The air was smooth. From Arnold's cockpit, the jagged peaks and snow-covered ridges stretched out like a map, glinting in the sunlight. But then, something broke the ordinary calm. The sighting at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Arnold's attention was caught by a sudden flash, a bright, metallic glint against the blue sky. Then another. Looking closer, he saw 9 objects flying in a loose formation. They moved swiftly, weaving in and out as though guided by an unseen current. They weren't planes, at least not like any Arnold recognized. He later described them as saucer-like, skipping through the air like a stone across water. Each was crescent-shaped, thin, and flat, with a strange bluish-white sheen. They moved in unison, silent and unnerving. What struck Arnold most was their speed. He estimated their velocity at over 1,700 miles per hour, faster than any known aircraft at the time. For nearly 2 minutes, Arnold tracked the formation, stunned. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the objects streaked out of sight, vanishing behind the mountains. Reporting the experience, Arnold landed in Yakima, Washington, still shaken. At first, he confided in fellow pilots and airport staff, hoping someone else might have seen what he did. By the following day, he decided to file a formal report with the local authorities. Soon, the press got hold of the story. The East Oregonian newspaper ran an article on June 25. By June 26, it was national news. Headlines blared: "Impossible speed objects seen by pilot over Mount Rainier." It was one phrase in particular that captured the public's imagination. Arnold's comparison to saucers skipping on water was misinterpreted by reporters as a description of the objects themselves. Overnight, the term, flying saucers, was born. The public reaction: the United States was primed for mystery. World War II had ended just 2 years earlier, and the atomic age had begun. Radar, jet engines, and rockets were transforming the very concept of flight. For the average citizen, the sky no longer seemed secure or fully understood. Arnold's story exploded into a phenomenon. Within weeks, newspapers across the country were filled with similar accounts. Farmers, housewives, policemen, and even other pilots claimed to see disks, crescents, and lights darting through the sky. The summer of 1947 became the summer of the saucers. Government involvement: the U.S. military could not ignore the reports. At the time, Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union were rising, and the possibility of foreign aircraft intruding into American airspace was a serious concern. The Army Air Forces launched an investigation. Intelligence officers interviewed Arnold directly. They examined his reputation, his flight record, and his character. Their conclusion: he was a credible witness who genuinely believed what he had seen. Still, they could not explain it. Radar stations had detected nothing unusual. No experimental aircraft were reported in the area. Officially, the sighting was left unidentified. Skeptical explanations: not everyone accepted Arnold's testimony at face value. Skeptics suggested he may have misidentified natural phenomena. Some argued he had seen reflections of sunlight on his plane's windshield. Others proposed unusual cloud formations or mirages. Another theory was that Arnold had glimpsed a flock of birds, distorted by distance and light. Yet Arnold insisted that the objects were metallic, structured, and moving far faster than any bird could travel. The speed estimate of 1,700 miles per hour was also controversial. Critics argued that Arnold miscalculated, perhaps misjudging the distance or the timing of the object's flight. If his estimate was wrong, the mystery might dissolve into something ordinary. But for many, the sheer conviction in Arnold's account kept the story alive. Cultural impact: whether real or mistaken, the Kenneth Arnold sighting changed history. His report didn't just capture headlines, it reshaped the vocabulary of mystery. The phrase, "flying saucer," entered popular culture overnight. Science fiction authors, filmmakers, and comic book artists seized on the imagery. Within a year, Hollywood was releasing films featuring disc-shaped craft from other worlds. Meanwhile, civilian groups began forming to track sightings. Amateur investigators, journalists, and scientists debated the possibility of extraterrestrial visitors. For some, the Arnold case represented the first glimpse of an entirely new reality. Kenneth Arnold's later life: for Kenneth Arnold himself, the sudden fame was not entirely welcome. He was bombarded with letters, phone calls, and interview requests. At times, he expressed frustration that his life had been so thoroughly disrupted. Yet he never recanted. Over the years, Arnold stood by his account, insisting he had reported the truth as he saw it. He even wrote books and gave lectures, hoping to bring clarity to what had become a confusing and controversial subject. Until his death in 1984, Kenneth Arnold remained a reluctant but central figure in the world of UFO lore. Legacy of the sighting: the 1947 sighting was not an isolated event. Just 2 weeks later, in Roswell, New Mexico, another incident involving mysterious debris and military secrecy fueled even greater speculation. Together, these events formed the foundation of modern UFO mythology. Today, historians see Arnold's sighting as the spark that ignited decades of fascination. It marked the beginning of government projects like Project Sign, Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book, each attempting to unravel the enigma of unidentified flying objects. Whether one believes in extraterrestrial visitors or not, the fact remains: the modern UFO era began with one man, alone in a cockpit, staring at something that defied explanation. Closing reflection: what Kenneth Arnold saw on that clear summer afternoon may never be known with certainty. To some, it was a simple misperception, magnified by imagination and media. To others, it was the first undeniable glimpse of technology beyond human invention. And so the story remains suspended, like the strange formation of 9 shining objects over Mount Rainier. Was it illusion, invention, or intrusion? The mystery lingers, waiting in the silence of the sky. The Maury Island incident, UFOs, debris, and mystery in Puget Sound. On a quiet summer morning in 1947, a small crew patrolling the waters of Puget Sound claimed they witnessed something extraordinary: metallic discs hovering over the bay, raining down strange debris. Within weeks, their story would be linked to the first widely reported UFO encounter, the Kenneth Arnold sighting, and would even end in the mysterious deaths of 2 military officers. This is the Maury Island incident, a case tangled in mystery, controversy, and suspicion. Setting the stage: the post-war United States was a nation of contrasts. On one hand, it was an age of progress, aviation technology was advancing rapidly, and the atomic age had dawned. On the other, it was a time of anxiety. The Cold War had begun, and the American public lived under the shadow of uncertainty. In June 1947, Kenneth Arnold's sighting of 9 unusual objects over Mount Rainier captured headlines. But just days before his flight, another story had begun to unfold a few miles away, in the waters off Maury Island near Tacoma, Washington. The incident on June 21, 1947, Harold Dahl, a harbor patrolman, was out on his boat with his teenage son, his dog, and 2 crew members. Their job was routine, scanning the waters near Maury Island for stray logs that might pose hazards to ships. As they drifted across the sound, Dahl claimed that 6 large, donut-shaped objects appeared in the sky. Silent and gleaming, they hovered about half a mile above his boat. Then, one of the discs seemed to falter. It began to wobble and release a cascade of metallic debris, dark fragments, hot and jagged. Some of it struck the boat. One piece injured Dahl's son, another killed their dog outright. Terrified, Dahl steered for shore. The strange craft, after circling overhead, reportedly regrouped and disappeared into the distance. Reporting the encounter shaken by the event, Dahl confided in his supervisor, Fred Chrisman. Chrisman was a more seasoned man, a World War II veteran, skeptical of wild tales. But when he visited the site himself, he claimed he too saw unusual material scattered on the beach, a dark, metallic substance unlike anything familiar. Shortly after, Dahl said he was approached by a mysterious visitor. The man, dressed in black, warned him not to speak of what he had seen. If he did, the stranger suggested, harm would come to him and his family. This encounter would later be described as one of the first appearances of the so-called Men in Black. Kenneth Arnold and the investigators' news of Dahl and Chrisman's story spread quickly, reaching none other than Kenneth Arnold himself. Fresh from his own sighting over Mount Rainier, Arnold was already in the national spotlight. Curious and perhaps hoping to find corroborating evidence, he traveled to Tacoma to meet the men. To help evaluate the case, Arnold enlisted 2 Air Force intelligence officers, Captain William Davidson and First Lieutenant Frank Brown. The officers interviewed Dahl and Chrisman, inspected fragments of the alleged debris, and collected samples to take back to their base. Tragedy in the air on August 1, 1947, Davidson and Brown boarded a B-25 bomber with the collected evidence. They departed from McCord Field, heading for California. But tragedy struck. Shortly after takeoff, the plane caught fire and crashed near Kelso, Washington. Both officers were killed. The crash added a chilling dimension to the story. For believers, it seemed like confirmation that the case involved something dangerous, perhaps even otherworldly. For skeptics, it suggested human error and coincidence. But the deaths of 2 military officers could not easily be ignored. Skeptical explanations from the beginning, the Maury Island story was plagued with doubt. When Air Force investigators examined the debris, they identified it as ordinary slag, a byproduct of industrial smelting, common in the Pacific Northwest. Some suspected the entire story had been fabricated as part of a hoax. Harold Dahl himself later signed a statement admitting he had made it up, though he later retracted, claiming he had been pressured to deny the truth. Fred Chrisman's involvement also fueled suspicion. Known for his eccentric personality and later tied to other conspiracy theories, Chrisman was seen by many as an unreliable witness. In the official view of the Air Force, the Maury Island incident was nothing more than a misunderstanding, or worse, a deliberate attempt to mislead. The Men in Black connection. What makes the Maury Island incident especially significant is its early link to the mythology of the Men in Black. Dahl's account of being threatened by a man in dark clothing, a figure who seemed to know personal details about his life, would be echoed in countless UFO reports over the decades. For researchers, this was one of the first instances of alleged intimidation tied to a UFO sighting. Whether real, imagined, or fabricated, it planted the seed of a legend that endures today. Cultural impact. Although overshadowed by Kenneth Arnold's sighting and the Roswell incident just weeks later, Maury Island occupies a strange and important place in UFO history. It was one of the first cases to involve physical evidence, debris that could be tested and examined. It was also one of the first to include direct intimidation, government involvement, and tragedy. For enthusiasts, it represented a potential cover-up, the suppression of extraordinary events to keep the public in the dark. For skeptics, it stood as a cautionary tale of exaggeration, rumor, and the dangers of hysteria in an uncertain age. Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman. Aftermath. Dahl faded into relative obscurity, seldom speaking about the incident in his later life. Chrisman, however, remained in the public eye. Over the years, he appeared in strange corners of conspiracy lore, from alleged CIA operations to being named, controversially and without basis, as a suspect in the Kennedy assassination. The Maury Island case clung to him as a reminder of his role in one of the most debated UFO stories of the 20th century. Legacy of the incident. Today, most historians and investigators classify the Maury Island incident as a hoax, or at least as a story exaggerated beyond recognition. The slag debris was industrial waste, the witness testimony contradictory, and the circumstances suspicious. And yet, for some, the case remains unresolved. The deaths of Davidson and Brown, the mysterious warning to Dahl, and the peculiar timing, coming just before Arnold's sighting in Roswell, keep the mystery alive. Whether genuine encounter or elaborate fabrication, Maury Island helped shape the mythology of UFOs in America. It introduced recurring themes, physical traces, government secrecy, ominous visitors, and unexplained tragedy. Closing reflection. In the end, the Maury Island incident leaves us with more questions than answers. Was it an elaborate hoax spun out of control? A misunderstanding magnified by fear? Or did Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman stumble onto something extraordinary, a fragment of a mystery that the world was not yet ready to face? As the waves lap against the shores of Maury Island, the story endures. Like the slag that washed onto its beaches, it remains a fragment of history, heavy, dark, and impossible to ignore. The Roswell incident, crash, cover-up, and the birth of a legend. On a summer night in 1947, something fell from the sky near a small desert town in New Mexico. What began as a routine military recovery operation soon spiraled into one of the most famous mysteries of the 20th century. Reports of wreckage, conflicting government statements, and whispers of alien bodies turned Roswell into a symbol, a story that refuses to die. This is the Roswell incident, where fact, rumor, and secrecy collided to create the modern UFO legend. The desert setting. In July 1947, Roswell, New Mexico, was a quiet town surrounded by vast stretches of desert. Its population was small, its pace of life slow. But nearby lay the Roswell Army Airfield, home to the 509th Bomb Group, the only unit in the world at the time capable of delivering atomic weapons. This was a place of high security and cutting-edge military operations. But in early July, attention shifted to the rolling ranch lands outside town, where an unusual discovery was made. The discovery on either July 3rd or 4th, after a violent thunderstorm, rancher W.W. Mac Basel found strange debris scattered across his land at the Foster Ranch. The material was unlike anything he had seen. He described thin, metallic sheets that would not bend or burn, and lightweight beams with strange markings. Some accounts even mention a foil-like substance that returned to its shape after being crumpled. Basel collected some of the debris and drove it into Roswell, showing it to the local sheriff. Unsure what to make of it, the sheriff contacted the Roswell Army Airfield. Soon, intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel was dispatched to investigate. The first announcement on July 8, 1947, the Roswell Army Airfield issued a stunning press release. It stated that personnel had recovered a flying disc from a ranch near Roswell. The news spread quickly. Headlines across the nation declared that the U.S. military had captured a flying saucer. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the extraordinary was now undeniable. But within 24 hours, the story changed. The retraction. The very next day, the Army issued a second statement. The debris, they said, was not from a flying disc but from a weather balloon. To prove it, they staged a press conference. Officers, including Major Marcel, posed with what appeared to be fragments of a conventional balloon and radar reflector. The message was clear: there was nothing unusual in Roswell. The flying disc had been a misunderstanding. For the press and much of the public, the explanation ended the story. Headlines shifted, and Roswell faded from the spotlight. Silence and resurgence for decades, Roswell remained largely forgotten outside of New Mexico. But in the late 1970s, interest revived. Researchers interviewed surviving witnesses, including Jesse Marcel, who now claimed that the materials he recovered were not balloon fragments but something far stranger. Stories emerged of additional crash sites, secret transports of wreckage, and even rumors of alien bodies recovered by the military. Former military personnel, local residents, and second-hand witnesses described a cover-up that seemed more elaborate than the initial explanation. By the 1980s and 1990s, Roswell had become the centerpiece of UFO research, a case too large and too tangled to ignore. Project Mogul. When skeptics revisited the case, they found a plausible explanation in declassified documents. At the time, the U.S. military was conducting Project Mogul, a top-secret program to detect Soviet nuclear tests using high-altitude balloons equipped with sensitive microphones. The debris found on Basel's ranch, they argued, was consistent with Mogul equipment, unusual materials, radar reflectors, and balloons that were classified at the time. The secrecy surrounding Mogul might explain the contradictory statements and swift retraction. Yet, for many believers, the balloon explanation, whether conventional or secret, could not account for the strangeness of the materials or the persistence of local testimony. The alien body claims. Perhaps the most dramatic element of the Roswell story involves alleged bodies. Starting in the 1980s, witnesses claimed that small, humanoid beings had been recovered at the crash site. Some said they were transported under heavy security to bases like Wright-Patterson in Ohio. In 1995, a British television producer released footage claiming to show an autopsy of an alien recovered from Roswell. The Alien Autopsy film drew massive attention but was later admitted to be a hoax, though some insisted it was based on genuine images. The body claims remain the most controversial part of the Roswell narrative. For some, they are evidence of a cosmic encounter. For others, they are a mix of faulty memory, exaggeration, and hoax. Government responses. In the 1990s, under public pressure, the U.S. Air Force issued two detailed reports. The first, in 1994, concluded that the debris had indeed come from Project Mogul. The second, in 1997, explained the alien body stories as misremembered accounts of test dummies dropped during high-altitude parachute experiments in the 1950s. To skeptics, these reports closed the case. But to believers, they only deepened suspicion. Why would the government take such effort to re-explain an event decades later, unless there was something more to hide? Cultural impact. Regardless of the truth, Roswell transformed global culture. It became a symbol of secrecy, distrust, and the possibility of otherworldly contact. Television shows, films, novels, and documentaries have all drawn on Roswell as the archetypal UFO crash. From the X-Files to blockbusters like Independence Day, the image of a crashed saucer in the desert has become embedded in the modern imagination. The town of Roswell itself embraced the mystery. Today, it hosts museums, festivals, and an economy built around UFO tourism. What began as a quiet rancher's discovery has become a worldwide legend. The legacy. The Roswell incident remains unresolved in the eyes of many. For skeptics, it was a misunderstanding of classified technology, magnified by rumor. For believers, it was the first undeniable evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, buried under layers of government secrecy. The truth lies somewhere between documentation and testimony, between the official record and the enduring mystery. Closing reflection. What really fell from the sky in Roswell in July 1947? Was it a balloon, ordinary or secret, that collided with stormy weather? Or was it something beyond human technology, retrieved and concealed to this day? 70 years later, the desert sands hold their silence. The debris is gone, the witnesses mostly passed on. Yet the story persists, a reminder that sometimes, the greatest mysteries are not only in the sky above us, but in the shadows of our own uncertainty. The Mantell UFO incident, a chase into mystery. On a cold afternoon in January 1948, a Kentucky Air National Guard pilot took to the skies in pursuit of an unidentified flying object. What began as a routine interception soon turned tragic, leaving Captain Thomas Mantell dead and fueling one of the earliest UFO controversies of the modern era. This is the Mantell incident, where mystery met tragedy in the high skies. Setting the scene, the date was January 7, 1948. Across the American Midwest, reports were flooding into police stations and military bases. A strange object was seen hovering in the sky. From Maysville, Kentucky, to Fort Knox, eyewitnesses described a massive disc or cone-shaped craft, metallic and gleaming in the sun. At the time, the U.S. was only months past the Roswell headlines of 1947. The term, flying saucer, was still new, but public awareness of unidentified flying objects was already widespread. Against this backdrop, the Air Force scrambled fighter planes to investigate. Captain Thomas Mantell. Among those called into action was Captain Thomas Francis Mantell, a decorated World War II veteran. Mantell had logged hundreds of hours of flight time, including combat missions over Europe. By 1948, he was serving with the Kentucky Air National Guard, flying the P-51 Mustang, a fighter renowned for its role in the war. That afternoon, Mantell and 3 other pilots were returning from a routine mission when they received orders: investigate a UFO sighting near Godman Army Airfield, not far from Fort Knox. Mantell acknowledged and adjusted course. The pursuit was about to begin. The chase at approximately 1:45 p.m., air traffic controllers at Godman Field observed the mysterious object through binoculars. They described it as large, round, and metallic, reflecting sunlight, but details remained vague. Mantell and his wingmen climbed rapidly, scanning the skies. At 2:30 p.m., Mantell radioed back, "The object is directly ahead of me and above me, moving about half my speed. It appears to be metallic and of tremendous size. It seems to be climbing as I climb." His wingmen soon fell behind. Their aircraft were not equipped with oxygen, and at high altitude they risked blacking out. Mantell pressed on alone. At 3:15 p.m., his final transmission crackled over the radio. He was still climbing, still pursuing. Moments later, contact was lost. The crash. Mantell's P-51 Mustang continued to ascend past 20,000 feet, dangerously high without supplemental oxygen. Investigators later concluded that he likely lost consciousness due to hypoxia. The plane spiraled out of control, crashing in a farm field near Franklin, Kentucky. Mantell was killed instantly. He was just 25 years old. The tragedy shocked the nation. Newspapers carried the story within hours: pilot dies chasing flying saucer. Public reaction. The Mantell incident was among the first UFO cases to result in a fatality, and it electrified the public. For believers, it seemed like proof that unidentified objects were real, and dangerous. For skeptics, it was evidence of human error, compounded by confusion in a moment of crisis. But the question remained: what exactly had Mantell been chasing? Early theories. Initial speculation ran wild. Some suggested Mantell had been pursuing a Soviet aircraft, perhaps a reconnaissance plane testing U.S. defenses. Others whispered of extraterrestrial visitors. The official Air Force explanation shifted several times. At first, they claimed the object might have been Venus, shining brightly in the afternoon sky. Later, they proposed that Mantell had mistaken a skyhook balloon, part of a classified high-altitude research program, for a UFO. The skyhook theory fit many details. These balloons were large, reflective, and capable of reaching altitudes far beyond a P-51 ceiling. At the time, however, skyhook was a secret project, so the explanation could not be publicly confirmed. The Venus debate. The Venus explanation drew sharp criticism. Astronomers pointed out that Venus was indeed visible that day, but only faintly, and unlikely to be mistaken for a tremendous metallic object by trained pilots. Critics accused the Air Force of deflecting, offering an implausible answer to quell public concern. Even Major General Roger Ramey, the same officer who had been involved in the Roswell retraction, repeated the Venus claim in press briefings. The story satisfied few. Project Sign and UFO investigations. The Mantell incident became a cornerstone case for Project Sign, the U.S. Air Force's first official UFO investigation program launched in 1948. For the investigators, Mantell's death underscored the seriousness of UFO reports. This was no longer idle speculation or sensational headlines. A decorated pilot had died while chasing an unknown object in U.S. airspace. Project Sign's classified assessments included both skeptical and open-minded evaluations. While some analysts leaned toward conventional explanations, others quietly considered the possibility of advanced technology not of human origin. The human cost beyond the speculation, the loss of Captain Mantell weighed heavily on his family, friends, and fellow servicemen. He left behind a widow and small children, and his death became entangled in a narrative far larger than his own life. For many Americans, Mantell became a symbol, the first casualty of the UFO age. His bravery, determination, and tragic fate lent a human face to a mystery that might otherwise have remained abstract. Skeptics versus believers. Over the decades, interpretations of the Mantell case have diverged sharply. Skeptics argue that hypoxia explains everything. Mantell, deprived of oxygen, likely experienced tunnel vision, confusion, and impaired judgment. What he thought was a massive object could have been a distant balloon, distorted by altitude and fatigue. His persistence in climbing was a tragic error, not an encounter with the unknown. Believers, however, point to the reports from ground observers and Mantell's own words. A balloon or Venus, they argue, could not account for a structured, metallic object of tremendous size that appeared to maneuver and climb. For them, Mantell died confronting something beyond human technology. Cultural impact. The Mantell incident cemented the link between UFOs and government secrecy. The shifting explanations, the involvement of classified projects, and the echoes of Roswell created a climate of distrust. It also entered popular culture. Newspapers, magazines, and later television programs retold Mantell's story as a cautionary tale of mystery and danger in the skies. For ufologists, it was an essential case, one of the Big Three of the 1940s, alongside Kenneth Arnold's sighting and Roswell. Legacy of the case today. The consensus among historians is that Mantell likely chased a skyhook balloon. The debris of such balloons was later identified in other incidents, and their existence retroactively explained sightings once shrouded in mystery. And yet, uncertainty remains. Mantell himself believed he was pursuing something solid, structured, and extraordinary. His words and his fate ensure that the incident endures as more than a simple case of mistaken identity. Closing reflection. On January 7, 1948, Captain Thomas Mantell climbed higher and higher, chasing a mystery into the cold, thin air. Whether he pursued a balloon, a planet, or something more, we cannot say with certainty. What we know is that he never came back. His plane fell to Earth, but the mystery he pursued has never landed. The Mantell incident stands as both tragedy and enigma, a story where human courage met the unknown, and where the line between explanation and mystery remains blurred. The Gorman dogfight, a pilot's duel with the unknown. On a crisp autumn night in 1948, a young Air National Guard pilot engaged in a mid-air pursuit unlike anything in his training manual. Over the darkened skies of Fargo, North Dakota, Lieutenant George Gorman reported a duel with a glowing object that seemed to anticipate his every move. This is the story of the Gorman dogfight, one of the most extraordinary UFO encounters of the early jet age. The setting. The date was October 1, 1948. The Second World War had ended just 3 years earlier, and the United States was in the early stages of the Cold War. Tensions were high, radar systems were expanding, and the Air Force had only recently become an independent branch of the military. That evening, a football game in Fargo drew large crowds, and small planes flew overhead for post-game events. Among them was a P-51 Mustang, piloted by Lieutenant George F. Gorman, a 25-year-old World War II veteran with over 800 flight hours to his name. After completing his formation flight, Gorman chose to remain in the air to log additional night flying time. What happened next would place him in the center of one of the strangest aerial confrontations ever recorded. First contact at around 9 p.m., while flying at 5,000 feet, Gorman noticed a small light moving across the city. At first, he assumed it was another aircraft. Fargo's airfield confirmed a civilian Piper Cub was in the area, but the light Gorman pursued was behaving differently. Curious, he gave chase. The object was described as a bright, white sphere, about 6 to 8 inches in diameter, glowing like a bulb. It showed no wings, no fuselage, no exhaust, only a steady, self-contained light. The dogfight begins. Gorman began maneuvering his P-51 to close in. The light suddenly accelerated, veered off, and climbed. Surprised, Gorman pulled into a steep pursuit. For the next 27 minutes, the two engaged in a series of sharp turns, dives, and climbs. Every time Gorman tried to gain the upper hand, the object countered. When he banked left, it banked right. When he dove, it climbed. At one point, the light charged directly at Gorman's plane at high speed, forcing him to dive to avoid a collision. The glowing object then stopped abruptly and resumed circling. Gorman later said, "It was like it knew every move I made. It outturned me every time." Witnesses on the ground. Gorman was not alone in his sighting. The Piper Cub's pilot and passenger both reported seeing a fast-moving light in the sky, distinct from Gorman's aircraft. Personnel at the Fargo Airfield Control Tower also observed the light and confirmed its unusual maneuvers. Multiple witnesses gave the case credibility. This was not one man's imagination. The event was corroborated by several trained and untrained observers. The chase ends after nearly half an hour. Gorman broke off the pursuit. Low on fuel and exhausted, he returned to base. The object, still circling and darting through the night, eventually disappeared into the distance. The next morning, his report triggered one of the most thorough early Air Force UFO investigations. The Air Force dispatched intelligence officers to interview Gorman, the Piper Cub witnesses, and tower personnel. His P-51 was checked for radiation exposure, and Geiger counters reportedly registered slightly elevated levels, though within safe limits. The investigators considered several possibilities. Other aircraft. Could it have been another plane? None were logged in the area besides the Piper Cub. Balloon. A weather balloon was launched earlier that day, but witnesses said the light moved far too quickly and deliberately. Stars or planets. Some suggested Gorman had misidentified Vega or another bright star. But stars do not engage in aerial maneuvers at 27,000 feet. Illusion or fatigue. Gorman had been flying for hours that day. Perhaps exhaustion or optical illusion made the light seem to move intelligently. Yet the testimony of other observers made such explanations unsatisfying. The official conclusion ultimately, the Air Force's Project Sign, its first official UFO investigation program, listed the Gorman dogfight as unexplained. Later, skeptics argued that Gorman may indeed have been chasing a lighted weather balloon, misinterpreting its drifting motion as evasive maneuvers. The abrupt movements, they said, were illusions created by Gorman's own high-speed maneuvers relative to the balloon. But this explanation fails to account for the intensity of the chase, the near collision, and the corroborating witnesses who saw the light dart rapidly around the sky. Gorman's conviction. Lieutenant Gorman remained convinced he had encountered something extraordinary. He was not prone to exaggeration, and his wartime service lent him credibility. In his report, he wrote, "I am convinced that there was thought behind the movements of the object. It was controlled." He insisted it was no balloon, star, or illusion, but a real, solid object displaying intelligence. Cultural impact. The Gorman dogfight quickly became one of the classic cases in UFO history. Alongside the Kenneth Arnold sighting, the Roswell incident, and the Mantell tragedy, it formed a cornerstone of the late 1940s UFO wave. Unlike Roswell, it had no debris. Unlike Mantell, it ended without loss of life. But its vivid detail, a dogfight between man and machine, captured imaginations. In popular culture, it was retold in books, magazines, and later in television documentaries. For UFO researchers, it was a case where multiple witnesses and military involvement made dismissal difficult. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics maintain that the light was almost certainly a balloon, its glow caused by sunlight reflecting at high altitude even after dark on the ground. Gorman, maneuvering aggressively, interpreted the light's passive drift as intelligent control. Believers argue the opposite. Gorman was a skilled pilot who knew the difference between chasing a drifting balloon and being outmaneuvered by something intelligent. The object's precision, speed, and apparent awareness of his tactics suggest technology beyond 1948 capabilities. The legacy. More than 70 years later, the Gorman dogfight remains unresolved. It highlights the challenges of UFO reports, credible witnesses, conflicting evidence, and explanations that never quite satisfy all the facts. For skeptics, it was a balloon misperceived under stressful conditions. For believers, it was an encounter with something advanced, perhaps not of this earth. What is certain is that George Gorman fought an opponent that night, one he could neither defeat nor explain. Closing reflection. In the dark skies above Fargo, a lone pilot found himself in a duel with the unknown. His Mustang roared through dives and climbs, but the small glowing light always stayed one step ahead. Was it balloon, illusion, or intelligence? The truth remains elusive. The Gorman dogfight stands as one of the great unsolved encounters of the early UFO era, a story where courage, skill, and mystery crossed paths in the night sky. The Childs Whitted encounter. A passenger jet meets the unknown in the quiet early hours of July 24, 1948. Two seasoned airline pilots flying a passenger jet from Houston to Atlanta reported a breathtaking sight. They claimed a massive, glowing, rocket-shaped object swept past their aircraft at tremendous speed, close enough to see its windows and flames trailing from its tail. This is the Childs Whitted encounter, one of the most dramatic early UFO sightings, and a case that even Project Blue Book could never fully explain. The setting. It was just past 2 a.m. when Eastern Airlines Flight 576 lifted through the night sky over the American South. The aircraft was a Douglas DC-3, a sturdy twin-engine plane widely used in civilian aviation after World War II. At the controls were Captain Clarence S. Childs, a former U.S. Army Air Corps pilot, and his co-pilot, John B. Whitted, a fellow war veteran with years of flying experience. Both men were calm, disciplined, and highly trained. They were responsible not just for their own lives but for 24 passengers sleeping in the cabin behind them. First sight at approximately 2:45 a.m., as the DC-3 cruised at 5,000 feet near Montgomery, Alabama, Childs noticed something unusual. Ahead in the distance, he saw a bright light approaching. At first, he assumed it was another aircraft, perhaps a jet or bomber from a nearby military base. But within seconds, the light grew larger, brighter, and distinctly unusual. Childs nudged his co-pilot. Both men watched in stunned silence as a cigar-shaped craft appeared out of the darkness, glowing with intense brilliance. The object described. Childs and Whitted gave remarkably similar accounts. The object was long, metallic, and cigar-shaped, about 100 feet in length and twice the size of their DC-3. Along its side, it appeared to have rows of rectangular windows, illuminated from within by a bluish-white light. From the rear, flames erupted, a reddish-orange exhaust or fiery trail, unlike any conventional aircraft. The craft had no wings, no tail fins, and no markings. Most astonishingly, it passed within just 1,000 feet of their plane, close enough for the pilots to see details clearly. The flyby. As the object streaked past, Captain Childs banked the DC-3 sharply to the left, fearing collision. The unknown craft then made a sudden ascent, climbing at a steep angle into the night sky. Within seconds, it vanished into the clouds above. The encounter lasted only 10 to 15 seconds, but it left both pilots shaken and deeply impressed. Witness in the cabin. Among the sleeping passengers, only one stirred during the event. Clarence L. McMinnville, an off-duty U.S. Air Force crew chief, reported waking briefly to see a bright flash of light outside his window. He did not see the craft itself, but his testimony lent partial corroboration to the pilot's account. Reporting the encounter upon landing in Atlanta, Childs and Whitted wasted no time. They filed an official report with the Civil Aeronautics Authority and the U.S. Air Force. Their credibility was strong. Both men were war veterans with reputations for reliability. They described the object in careful, technical language, not as a fantasy, but as a structured, physical craft they had narrowly avoided in the night sky. The Air Force investigation. The report reached Project Sign, the Air Force's first official UFO investigation team. Analysts took the case seriously. The description of a structured craft with windows was unusual compared to many UFO sightings, which often involved simple lights or vague shapes. One early interpretation within Project Sign was that the object might have been an advanced extraterrestrial vehicle. A draft report reportedly listed the case as one of several incidents suggesting interplanetary origins. However, the Air Force quickly backed away from such conclusions, seeking conventional explanations instead. Possible explanations. Several theories were considered. One meteor or fireball. Skeptics argued that the pilots may have witnessed a bright meteor streaking through the atmosphere. The fiery trail and sudden disappearance into the clouds seemed consistent. But Childs and Whitted were adamant, this was no meteor. They saw windows, structure, and deliberate maneuvering. Two experimental aircraft. Some suggested it was a secret military rocket or prototype jet. But no records of such a craft existed, and no known aircraft of the era matched the description. 3. Optical illusion. Others proposed that fatigue, reflection, or atmospheric distortion may have created the impression of structure where there was none. Yet two experienced pilots gave nearly identical reports. For extraterrestrial hypothesis. Though not publicly endorsed, several Project Sign members privately believed the encounter could represent a non-human craft. Project Blue Book's conclusion. When Project Sign evolved into Project Grudge, and later Project Blue Book, the official verdict shifted. The encounter was officially categorized as a fireball meteor, misidentified by the pilots. To the Air Force, this explanation closed the case. But many researchers remained unsatisfied. The pilots' insistence on a structured, metallic craft with windows, details inconsistent with meteors, kept the mystery alive. The pilots' conviction. Both Childs and Whitted stood by their account for the rest of their lives. They had no interest in sensationalism and did not profit from the story. They were career aviators, men who understood the difference between natural phenomena and mechanical craft. Captain Childs, in particular, rejected the meteor explanation outright. It was a ship. I have seen meteors, I have seen falling stars, and this was not that. What we saw had design and control. Cultural impact. The Childs, Whitted encounter added fuel to the growing UFO wave of the late 1940s. Coming just months after the Mantell crash and the Gorman dogfight, it reinforced the idea that something extraordinary was appearing in American skies. Newspapers across the country carried the story, and public fascination deepened. In the eyes of many, the encounter represented an airliner's close brush with the unknown, a chilling reminder that even commercial flights were not beyond the reach of mystery. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics emphasized that meteors can appear structured, and fatigue in the early morning hours may have influenced perception. They argue that the fiery exhaust and sudden disappearance are textbook meteor behavior. Believers, however, stress the pilot's testimony and professionalism. The object's windows, metallic surface, and deliberate maneuvering, they argue, cannot be dismissed as illusion. To them, Childs and Whitted encountered a craft of unknown, perhaps extraterrestrial, origin. The legacy today, the Childs-Whitted case remains unidentified in many UFO catalogs. While the official line leans toward a meteor, the strength of the witnesses' accounts ensures the case remains debated. It is often grouped with other high-credibility pilot sightings of the era, forming part of the foundation of modern UFO studies. Closing reflection. In the skies over Alabama, two airline pilots glimpsed something extraordinary, a glowing, windowed craft that flashed past their cockpit and vanished into the clouds. Was it a meteor, distorted by perception? A secret aircraft decades ahead of its time? Or was it something truly beyond human design? The child's-witted encounter remains suspended between explanation and enigma, a fleeting moment when the ordinary calm of a passenger flight gave way to the extraordinary mystery of the skies. The green fireballs, mysterious lights over the southwest between 1948 and 1950, a strange phenomenon swept across the skies of the American Southwest. Bright, glowing objects, green in color, fiery in brilliance, were reported streaking over military installations, cities, and desert landscapes. They were not ordinary meteors, and they appeared again and again, often in ways that defied explanation. This is the mystery of the green fireballs, a case that baffled scientists, troubled the U.S. military, and raised questions that linger to this day. The first reports the phenomenon began on the night of December 9, 1948. Dozens of witnesses in New Mexico reported a brilliant green object streaking across the sky. Among them were pilots, law enforcement officers, and residents near Albuquerque. Unlike normal meteors, the object did not fragment or leave a lasting trail. It glowed with an intense emerald hue, moved horizontally, and then faded abruptly. Over the following weeks, more reports came in, sometimes several in a single night. The sightings clustered around Los Alamos National Laboratory, Sandia Base, and other sensitive military sites involved in atomic research. For a nation entering the nuclear age, this was deeply unsettling. Eyewitness accounts witnesses consistently described the same thing: brilliant green objects, silent and fast, flying low across the horizon. One pilot reported a fireball traveling parallel to his aircraft before vanishing instantly. Security guards at Sandia Base claimed multiple green objects passed overhead in formation. Astronomers and military personnel, trained observers, insisted these were no ordinary meteors. The frequency was also unusual. Natural fireballs are rare, yet in late 1948 and throughout 1949, sightings occurred regularly across New Mexico and Texas. The military's concern because the sightings clustered around atomic facilities, the U.S. military treated them as a potential security threat. Were they Soviet reconnaissance devices? Secret weapons? Or something else entirely? The Air Force Office of Special Investigations launched inquiries. Local commanders demanded answers. The phenomenon was soon brought to the attention of Project Sign, the Air Force's first UFO investigation program. But the green fireballs were different from most UFO reports. They left no radar traces, showed no obvious maneuvering, and often resembled natural phenomena. The mystery deepened. The Los Alamos meetings to address the issue, the Air Force convened special panels of scientists at Los Alamos. Among those consulted was Dr. Lincoln La Paz, a respected astronomer and meteor expert from the University of New Mexico. La Paz conducted interviews, calculated trajectories, and studied reports. His conclusion: the green fireballs were not natural meteors. Their flight paths were too shallow, their behavior too consistent, and their frequency too high. He suggested they might be artificial objects, possibly surveillance devices of unknown origin. His findings alarmed military officials, but no definitive evidence was found. Characteristics of the fireballs: several key features made the fireballs unusual. Color: their intense green glow was unlike most natural meteors, which usually appear white, yellow, or orange. Path: they traveled horizontally for long distances, rather than descending steeply like falling meteors. Termination: instead of exploding or fragmenting, many simply winked out suddenly. Frequency: they appeared repeatedly, sometimes night after night, often in the same regions. Such traits suggested something more than coincidence. Scientific skepticism: not all scientists agreed with La Paz. Some argued the fireballs were indeed meteors, possibly containing copper, which can burn green in the atmosphere. Others believed they were fragments from comet streams producing unusual displays. The Air Force Scientific Advisory Board leaned toward the meteor explanation, though it admitted the frequency of sightings was unusual. To skeptics, the case was an example of observers misinterpreting natural events against a backdrop of Cold War anxiety. Project Twinkle in 1949, the Air Force launched a special program called Project Twinkle to study the phenomenon. Cameras and observation stations were set up in New Mexico to capture the fireballs on film. But Twinkle produced little useful data. The objects proved elusive, and the equipment often failed to record them. After a year, the project was quietly abandoned, its findings inconclusive. The security angle behind the scenes, however, concern persisted. Internal memos revealed that officials worried the fireballs might represent foreign technology. The fact that they repeatedly appeared near atomic facilities heightened fears of espionage or surveillance. Yet no wreckage was ever recovered. No radar tracks confirmed their presence. The mystery remained unresolved, floating between natural explanation and potential threat. Decline of sightings. By the early 1950s, reports of green fireballs declined. Occasional sightings continued, but the intense wave of 1948-50 faded. For some, this suggested they had been linked to a specific natural cycle of meteor activity. For others, it raised questions: had the phenomenon simply moved elsewhere, or had military secrecy silenced further reports? Cultural impact. The green fireballs quickly entered UFO lore. Unlike Roswell or the Mantell incident, they did not involve crashes or casualties. Instead, they represented a quieter but equally puzzling phenomenon: repeated, credible sightings over some of the most sensitive military sites in America. In popular culture, the image of glowing orbs in the night sky became part of UFO mythology. For researchers, the case highlighted the tension between scientific caution and military secrecy in the early Cold War. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics maintain the fireballs were natural meteors, their unusual appearance amplified by coincidence, fear, and repetition. They argue that copper-bearing meteors could explain the green color, and mass sightings can exaggerate memory and perception. Believers, however, point to Dr. La Paz's analysis, the frequency of the sightings, and their proximity to atomic facilities. To them, the fireballs represented a deliberate, intelligent presence, whether human or not. Legacy of the case. The green fireballs phenomenon occupies a unique place in UFO history. It was one of the first cases where scientists were formally involved, one of the first to be studied by special government programs, and one of the first linked explicitly to national security concerns. Though never explained, the fireballs shaped how the military and scientific community approached UFOs, with caution, secrecy, and sometimes dismissal. Closing reflection. Between 1948 and 1950, strange emerald lights cut across the skies of New Mexico, dazzling pilots, guards, and scientists alike. Were they meteors, glowing with the chemistry of the cosmos? Were they foreign probes, scanning America's atomic secrets? Or were they something even stranger, glimpsed briefly and then gone? Like the fireballs themselves, the answers flared brightly, then vanished into darkness. The mystery of the green fireballs endures, a reminder that even in an age of science and technology, the sky still holds secrets beyond our grasp. The Great Falls UFO film, 2 objects, 1 camera. Endless questions. In the summer of 1950, a minor league baseball team's general manager stepped outside with a film camera. What he captured in less than a minute of footage would become one of the most debated UFO films in history. For decades, experts, skeptics, and believers have pored over every frame, searching for answers in the flicker of 2 mysterious objects crossing the Montana sky. This is the Great Falls UFO film, a case where the evidence could be seen, but never fully explained. The setting. The date was August 15, 1950. The place, Great Falls, Montana. The skies were clear and bright, with the city bathed in late morning sunlight. At Legion Ballpark, Nick Mariana, general manager of the Great Falls Professional Baseball Club, was preparing for a game. Armed with his 16mm movie camera, Mariana hoped to capture scenic footage of the stadium and its surroundings for promotional use. But what he filmed instead would draw the attention of the U.S. Air Force, government investigators, and later, generations of UFO researchers. The sighting. Shortly before noon, Mariana and his secretary, Virginia Ronig, noticed 2 bright, silver objects moving across the sky. They appeared round or disc-shaped, reflecting sunlight, and flying in formation at high speed. Mariana quickly raised his camera and began filming. For 16 seconds, the film captured two white objects streaking through the Montana sky. They moved swiftly, side by side, before vanishing into the distance. To the naked eye, the objects appeared metallic, solid, and structured. Mariana was convinced they were not airplanes, no wings, no contrails, no sound. The resulting film was brief and shaky, but remarkable for its time. Unlike most UFO reports, which relied only on eyewitness accounts, Mariana had hard evidence, moving images that anyone could study. When projected, the footage showed two bright, circular objects crossing the sky from left to right. They flew steadily, with no erratic movements, before disappearing off-frame. Though grainy and lacking detail, the film sparked immediate interest. It was one of the first UFO sightings to be caught on camera, offering apparent proof of something unusual. Reporting the incident, Mariana contacted local media, and the story spread quickly. Soon, the U.S. Air Force requested to examine the film. Investigators from Project Grudge, the Air Force's UFO study at the time, arrived to interview Mariana and Ronig. The film was sent to Air Force laboratories for analysis. What they found, or claimed to find, would become a point of controversy. The Air Force investigation. After examining the footage, Air Force analysts concluded the objects were most likely two F-94 jet fighters flying in formation near Great Falls Air Force Base, just a few miles away. This explanation, however, raised immediate questions. Both Mariana and Ronig insisted the objects had no wings or tails, and their reflection was not consistent with jets. The objects also made no sound, despite their proximity. Even more troubling was Mariana's claim that the Air Force had removed key frames from his film. According to him, when the film was returned, the opening segments, which clearly showed disc-shaped craft, were missing. The Air Force denied altering the footage, but the allegation cast a long shadow over the case. The controversy of the missing frames. Mariana maintained until his death that the film originally contained clearer imagery of the discs, including their rotation and metallic structure. He accused the Air Force of deliberately censoring evidence to conceal the truth. For UFO researchers, this claim became central to the case. If true, it meant the government was not simply dismissing UFO reports but actively suppressing evidence. For skeptics, however, Mariana's story reflected exaggeration or misremembering. The film that survived, they argued, showed nothing more than distant aircraft. Scientific analyses. In the decades that followed, the Great Falls film was studied repeatedly by civilian researchers and scientists. In the 1960s, atmospheric physicist Dr. Roy Craig, working for the University of Colorado UFO Project, the Condon Committee, examined the film. He concluded the objects were consistent with two jet aircraft catching sunlight. In the 1970s, further analysis with improved techniques found no evidence of hoaxing. Some experts argued the reflections and motion did not match standard aircraft, leaving the mystery unresolved. Later computer analyses in the 1990s and 2000s confirmed the objects were real, physical, and airborne, but could not determine their exact nature. The debate continues: aircraft or something unknown? Witness credibility. The strength of the case lies partly in the credibility of its witnesses. Mariana was a respected community figure with no history of exaggeration. His secretary, Virginia Ronig, supported his account and never wavered in her testimony. Both described two bright, metallic discs, not conventional planes. Neither benefited financially or socially from their claim. In fact, Mariana often expressed frustration at how skeptics dismissed his account. Cultural impact. The Great Falls UFO film quickly became one of the most famous UFO cases of the early 1950s. Unlike Roswell, it had no debris. Unlike Mantell, it caused no death. Unlike the green fireballs, it left no scientific confusion. Instead, it offered visible, recorded evidence, something anyone could see with their own eyes. The footage has appeared in countless documentaries, books, and UFO compilations, often cited as one of the best UFO films ever made. For believers, it represents proof that structured, disc-like craft were operating in U.S. airspace. For skeptics, it is a textbook example of misidentification. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue that the film shows nothing more than military jets. The Air Force's official conclusion, that they were two F-94s, remains the most widely cited explanation. The grainy film, they say, lacks detail to prove otherwise. Believers, however, counter that the objects showed no wings, no contrails, and no jet-like characteristics. The alleged missing frames raise suspicion of a cover-up. To them, the film remains one of the strongest pieces of visual evidence for UFOs. The legacy. More than 70 years later, the Great Falls UFO film is still studied, debated, and reanalyzed. It is one of the rare UFO cases where hard evidence exists, not just testimony, but film. While it has never been conclusively explained, the film's endurance in UFO history reflects its power. It sits alongside Roswell, the Mantell incident, and the Childs-Whitted encounter as one of the cornerstones of early UFO lore. Closing reflection. On an ordinary summer morning in Montana, a man with a camera captured something extraordinary, two bright discs racing silently across the sky. Were they jets, reflections, or something beyond? The film leaves us with questions but no clear answers. The objects remain as mysterious today as they were in 1950, shimmering shapes locked forever in 16 seconds of celluloid. The Great Falls UFO film endures as a reminder: sometimes, the truth is right before our eyes, yet still just out of reach. The McMinnville UFO photographs. Discs. Over an Oregon farm on a spring evening in 1950, a farmer's wife stepped into her yard with a camera. She captured two photographs of a strange metallic object hanging in the sky above her farm. The images, later published in national magazines, would become two of the most famous UFO photographs in history, debated, defended, and scrutinized for over 70 years. This is the McMinnville UFO case, a mystery frozen on film. The setting. The place was McMinnville, Oregon, a small farming town in the Willamette Valley. The date was May 11, 1950. Paul and Evelyn Trent, a farming couple, lived on a modest property just outside the city. Like many rural families, they owned a simple camera to document family moments and farm life. But that evening, their camera would capture something entirely unexpected. The sighting. At around 7:30 p.m., Evelyn Trent stepped outside to check on the rabbits in her yard. Looking toward the northeast, she spotted something unusual in the sky, a metallic, disc-shaped object, tilted slightly as it hovered silently. Startled, she called for her husband. Paul Trent rushed outside, saw the object, and grabbed their Kodak Roamer I camera. He managed to take two photographs before the object silently drifted away into the distance. The entire encounter lasted only a few minutes. But the images it produced would last decades. The two photographs show a classic disc-shaped craft, rounded on top, flat on the bottom, with a faint dome or raised section. In the first photo, the object appears at a tilt, as if banking. In the second, it looks more level, floating steadily above the farmhouse and power lines. The clarity and composition of the photos were striking. Unlike blurred lights or vague streaks, the Trent images showed a solid, structured object against a familiar rural backdrop. Sharing the photos. At first, the Trents kept the photos private, showing them only to friends and neighbors. But word spread quickly in the small town. Eventually, a local reporter convinced them to share the images. In June 1950, the photographs were published in the McMinnville Telephone Register. Soon, larger newspapers picked up the story. By July, Life magazine featured the images in a spread on flying saucers, propelling them to national attention. The Trents, ordinary farmers with no connection to the UFO world, were suddenly at the center of an international debate. Air Force and investigator interest. The U.S. Air Force took note of the photographs but did not immediately issue an official analysis. Investigators from private UFO organizations, however, began examining the case. The Trent's credibility became a major point of focus. Friends, neighbors, and local reporters all described them as honest, straightforward people with no motive for a hoax. Neither Paul nor Evelyn sought fame or profit. In fact, they never received payment for the images published in Life. Skeptical challenges. Despite their credibility, skeptics raised questions. Some suggested the photographs showed a small model, perhaps a hubcap or a mirror, suspended from power lines with string. The framing of the photos, with visible wires overhead, fueled suspicion. Critics argued that the angle of the object and its placement in the sky were consistent with something dangling from a line. Yet close analysis found no evidence of strings, wires, or tampering. The negatives were examined by experts, including at McMinnville's own newspaper office, and later by national analysts. They appeared genuine and unaltered. The Condon Committee analysis in the late 1960s, the University of Colorado UFO Project, commonly called the Condon Committee, reviewed the Trent photographs as part of its broader study of UFOs. Their photographic analysts concluded the images showed a real object of large size, not a small model or reflection. The lighting, shadows, and perspective all matched the surrounding environment. The committee's report stated that the photographs were one of the few UFO reports in which all factors investigated, geometric, psychological, and physical, appear to be consistent with the assertion that an extraordinary flying object, silvery, metallic, disc-shaped, tens of meters in diameter, and evidently artificial, flew within sight of two witnesses. This was as close to validation as any UFO photograph had ever received. Renewed skepticism still, debate continued. In the 1970s and 1980s, skeptics revisited the case, again arguing that the object could have been a model or a hoax staged with suspended objects. But defenders pointed out that Paul and Evelyn never sought publicity, never changed their story, and never attempted to profit. If it was a hoax, they maintained it for decades without slip or contradiction. In the 1990s and early 2000s, computer enhancement of the photos revealed no signs of fakery. The edges of the object were consistent with solid structure, and no supporting wires or suspension mechanisms were detected. The Trents' consistency throughout their lives, Paul and Evelyn Trent never wavered. They described the object in the same terms from the beginning: metallic, disc-shaped, and silent. They avoided the limelight, spoke reluctantly to reporters, and often expressed surprise at the ongoing attention. For many, their modesty and consistency reinforced their credibility. Cultural impact. The McMinnville photographs became some of the most famous UFO images of the 20th century. They were reprinted in books, magazines, and documentaries around the world. For believers, they represented visual proof of disc-shaped craft long before UFOs became a cultural staple. For skeptics, they remained a frustrating case, not provably fake, but not conclusively extraordinary. In McMinnville itself, the photographs gave birth to a local tradition. Today, the town hosts the annual UFO Festival, one of the largest in the United States, celebrating the mystery first captured on a farmer's camera in 1950. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue the photos could have been faked with simple means. A small object, suspended by string, photographed at just the right angle, could produce a convincing illusion. Believers counter that the Trents had no reason to deceive. The detail, clarity, and official analyses point to a real, solid craft of extraordinary size. The case remains one of the most compelling in UFO history. The legacy. More than 7 decades later, the McMinnville photographs remain unexplained. They are among the few UFO cases where visual evidence stands up to repeated analysis. Unlike many sightings, the Trent story was simple, consistent, and free of embellishment. Whether they captured an experimental craft, a trick of light, or something not of this world, the mystery endures. Closing reflection. On a quiet Oregon evening in 1950, Evelyn Trent stepped outside to check her rabbits, and returned with a mystery that would outlast her lifetime. The 2 photographs she and her husband produced remain icons of UFO history. Were they images of a simple trick, or of something extraordinary flying silently above the farmhouse? The answer, like the object itself, hovers just beyond reach, suspended between belief and doubt, forever frozen on film. The Lubbock Lights, patterns in the Texas sky. In late summer of 1951, a quiet college town in Texas became the stage for one of the most famous UFO events of the 20th century. Strange formations of glowing lights passed overhead night after night, witnessed by dozens of people, including scientists. For many, it was proof that something extraordinary was in the skies. For skeptics, it was a case of mistaken identity. This is the story of the Lubbock Lights, a mystery that began with professors on a back porch and spread to become a national phenomenon. The setting: the city was Lubbock, Texas, home to Texas Technological College, now Texas Tech University. It was a warm, clear night on August 25, 1951. On the back porch of one home sat three professors: Dr. W. I. Robinson, a geologist, Dr. A. G. Oberg, a chemical engineer, and Dr. George Wheeler, a physicist. They were well-educated men, not prone to fanciful ideas. As they talked under the evening sky, something unexpected appeared overhead. The first sighting at around 9:20 p.m., the professors saw a formation of 30 to 40 lights moving swiftly in a curved, V-shaped pattern across the sky. The lights were bluish-green, glowing steadily, and traveling silently. The sight lasted only a few seconds, but within minutes, another formation passed overhead, just as large, just as silent. The professors were stunned. Over the following nights, the lights returned. The men began keeping detailed notes, logging the time, position, and number of lights. They observed that the objects flew fast, faster than commercial aircraft, and always in tight formation. To them, these were not shooting stars or random phenomena. The lights appeared organized, deliberate, and controlled. Witnesses multiply soon, reports spread across Lubbock. Residents described glowing lights racing silently overhead. Students at Texas Tech saw them from campus. Families observed them from their yards. Perhaps the most compelling testimony came from Carl Hart Jr., a 19-year-old freshman. On the night of August 30th, Hart set up his 35mm camera in his backyard. When the lights appeared, he captured a series of 5 photographs. The images showed arcs of glowing lights in V-shaped formations, cutting across the Texas sky. The photographs Hart's photos quickly became famous. They were published in local newspapers and later in national magazines like Life. For many, the photographs seemed to confirm what witnesses had described: groups of luminous objects, structured and moving in formation. Unlike many UFO cases, where only testimony exists, the Lubbock Lights came with visual documentation. The combination of educated witnesses and photographic evidence gave the case weight. Air Force investigation. The U.S. Air Force soon took notice. Investigators from Project Blue Book interviewed the professors, collected the photographs, and studied the reports. Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, the head of Project Blue Book, personally investigated. He interviewed dozens of witnesses, including the professors and Carl Hart Jr. Ruppelt found the professors credible and their accounts consistent. They were cautious, precise, and unwilling to speculate wildly. Hart, too, seemed honest, though his photographs could not conclusively prove the object's nature. Possible explanations. Several explanations were proposed. One, migrating birds. Some suggested the lights were plover birds reflecting light from new street lamps installed in Lubbock. The V-shaped formations matched common bird flight patterns. But witnesses, including scientists, insisted the lights were brighter, faster, and more structured than birds. 2 aircraft. Could they have been military planes? The Air Force denied any formations flying over Lubbock at the time. The objects also made no sound. 3 meteors or natural phenomena. Meteors can appear in clusters, but not in tight, organized V-shaped patterns. The frequency of sightings also argued against random meteor showers. For hoax skeptics suggested Carl Hart's photographs might have been faked by throwing objects into the air. But Hart consistently denied this, and no evidence of trickery was found. The professor's notes. One of the most remarkable aspects of the case was the professor's methodical approach. Over several weeks, they logged more than a dozen sightings. They calculated that the objects flew at about 600 miles per hour, at altitudes of 5,000 feet or more. They noted that the lights appeared to have some kind of luminosity rather than reflected light. Their data, while not conclusive, added scientific weight to the sightings. Project Blue Book's conclusion: despite extensive investigation, Project Blue Book could not fully explain the Lubbock lights. In its official report, the Air Force suggested the lights were most likely birds reflecting streetlights, but admitted the case remained unidentified. Captain Ruppelt himself later expressed uncertainty. He considered the bird explanation plausible, but admitted the professor's testimony suggested something more unusual. Public reaction: the Lubbock lights captured public imagination. Newspapers across the country reported the story. For many Americans, it reinforced the idea that strange objects were frequenting U.S. skies. The photographs, especially, became iconic. They were reprinted in magazines, books, and documentaries for decades, cementing the Lubbock case as one of the classic UFO mysteries. Skeptics versus believers: skeptics argue that the bird explanation is the most likely. Migrating plovers, reflecting the bright new streetlights of Lubbock, could have produced luminous arcs that appeared extraordinary to surprised observers. Believers, however, point to the consistency of the professor's testimony, the speed and silence of the lights, and the photographic evidence. For them, the Lubbock lights were structured craft, perhaps experimental, perhaps not of this world. The legacy today: the Lubbock lights remain unresolved. The case stands out because of its combination of multiple credible witnesses, repeated sightings, and photographic evidence. Few UFO cases have all three. The photographs, though debated, remain among the most famous images in UFO history. And the professor's careful notes ensure that the case cannot be easily dismissed as mere illusion. Closing reflection on warm Texas nights in 1951, arcs of glowing lights swept silently across the sky, seen by professors, students, families, and caught forever on film by a young man in his backyard. Were they birds, reflections, or something far more extraordinary? The Lubbock lights linger as one of the great mysteries of early UFO history, a puzzle where science, skepticism, and wonder still collide beneath the Texas stars. The Washington, D.C. UFO incident: lights over the Capitol in the summer of 1952, the skies over the United States Capitol lit up with unexplained lights. Radar operators, commercial pilots, and military jets all reported strange objects maneuvering directly above the nation's most secure airspace. For 2 weekends in July, Washington, D.C. became the center of the world's attention, as UFOs hovered over the White House and the Capitol. Newspapers called it an invasion. The Air Force scrambled to respond. This is the story of the Washington, D.C. UFO incident, a case that shook public confidence and pushed the government to its limits of explanation. The first night, July 19, 1952. It began on the evening of Saturday, July 19, 1952. At Washington National Airport, now Reagan National, radar operators noticed 7 unidentified blips appear on their screens. The objects moved erratically, sometimes streaking across the scope at speeds over 500 miles per hour, then slowing to a crawl. Some hovered motionless, only to dart away seconds later. Controllers checked with Andrews Air Force Base just outside the city. Their radar showed the same thing. Something was in the skies over Washington. Outside, airline pilots also reported seeing strange lights, glowing orange and white orbs moving in formation. Even a commercial crew for Capital Airlines spotted the objects from the air. This was no single witness account. It was radar confirmation, ground observation, and pilot testimony, all at once. Panic and pursuit as word spread, concern mounted. These were not ordinary radar anomalies, they were tracked by multiple stations, moving in ways no known aircraft could. Around midnight, the Air Force scrambled jets from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware. But when the fighters arrived, the lights vanished from radar. As soon as the jets left, the blips reappeared. This game of cat and mouse continued into the early hours. By dawn, the objects were gone. But the incident was only beginning. The second wave, July 26, 1952, exactly 1 week later, on the night of July 26, the lights returned. Again, radar operators at both Washington National and Andrews Air Force Base tracked multiple unknowns. Pilots on the ground reported glowing lights darting across the horizon. This time, fighter jets were scrambled more quickly. Lieutenant William Patterson, flying an F-94 interceptor, made visual contact with 4 glowing lights. He attempted to pursue, but the objects surrounded his jet, outmaneuvered him, and disappeared into the night. Patterson later admitted he was shaken. "I tried to close in, but they just disappeared. They were faster than anything I'd ever seen." Public outcry. By now, the press was in a frenzy. The Washington Post ran front-page headlines, "Saucer outran jet, pilot reveals." The New York Times and other national papers echoed the story. For the American public, the idea that unknown objects had penetrated restricted airspace, hovering over the White House and the Capitol, was alarming. Were they Soviet aircraft? Advanced weapons? Or something else entirely? The government faced mounting pressure to respond. The press conference on July 29, 1952, the Air Force held the largest press conference since World War II. Major General John H. Samford, Director of Air Force Intelligence, addressed more than 200 reporters. He admitted the Washington sightings were unexplained. Radar contacts, visual sightings, and pilot reports had all been confirmed. However, Samford suggested possible explanations: temperature inversions, a weather phenomenon where layers of warm air bend radar beams, creating false echoes. To skeptics, this was a reasonable answer. But to many, it felt like a dismissal. Could temperature inversions really explain pilots chasing glowing lights, or jets being surrounded in midair? The explanation raised as many questions as it answered. Project Blue Book's role at the time, the Air Force's official UFO study was Project Blue Book. The Washington sightings became its most high-profile case. Blue Book investigators reviewed radar data, pilot testimony, and weather records. Their final conclusion supported the temperature inversion explanation, though they admitted not all sightings fit neatly into that category. The public remained unconvinced. The incident had played out too dramatically, with too many credible witnesses, to be written off so easily. Witness accounts. Among the strongest accounts were from the Capital Airlines crew led by pilot Captain S.C. Pierman. Over 14 minutes, he reported 6 bright lights maneuvering around his plane. "They were like falling stars," he said, "but without tails." Radar operators such as Harry Barnes at Washington National also stood firm. He described the objects as solid returns, not radar glitches. "In all my years of radar work, I'd never seen anything like it." These overlapping reports, radar, pilots, controllers, formed a pattern that made simple explanations difficult. Skeptical explanations. Over the years, skeptics have revisited the case, offering alternatives. Temperature inversions could cause radar anomalies, though not visual sightings. Stars or meteors may have been misidentified by pilots under stress. Secret aircraft, perhaps experimental jets, could explain the maneuvers, though no evidence has surfaced. Each explanation covers part of the mystery, but none explain the incident fully. Cultural impact. The Washington, D.C. UFO flap marked a turning point. Unlike rural sightings or isolated reports, this was the nation's capital, the symbolic heart of American power. For weeks, newspapers and radio shows buzzed with speculation. Cartoons depicted flying saucers over the White House. Citizens wrote letters demanding answers. Even President Harry Truman reportedly took interest, calling Air Force officials directly to ask what was happening over Washington. The event cemented UFOs as a national issue, no longer confined to local rumors but a matter of public concern and government responsibility. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics maintain the sightings were caused by a combination of radar anomalies, weather effects, and misidentified natural lights. The objects, they argue, were never physical craft. Believers counter that radar and visual confirmation by multiple witnesses, pilots, controllers, and military personnel, prove otherwise. To them, the Washington sightings were one of the strongest cases of UFOs penetrating restricted airspace. The legacy of the Washington incident remains one of the most famous UFO cases ever recorded. It pushed the Air Force to expand Project Blue Book and marked the beginning of increased secrecy around UFO matters. For many historians, it was the moment UFOs stopped being fringe stories and became a serious subject in public debate. Closing reflection on 2 July nights in 1952, the skies over Washington, D.C. lit up with mysterious lights, tracked by radar, chased by jets, and seen by countless witnesses. Were they illusions of weather and radar? Advanced foreign craft? Or something not of this earth? The truth remains suspended over the Capitol, as elusive today as the glowing lights that once danced above the White House. The Fort Monmouth UFO case, radar, pilots, and a military mystery. In September of 1951, a U.S. Army research base in New Jersey became the focus of a highly unusual incident. Radar operators tracked unidentified objects performing maneuvers beyond known aircraft capabilities. Pilots reported glowing disks moving at impossible speeds. And the Air Force scrambled to investigate. This is the Fort Monmouth UFO case, a mystery that rattled the military and left behind more questions than answers. The setting: the place was Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, home to the Army's Signal Corps Radar Laboratory. The base specialized in cutting-edge radar technology and communications research. It was no ordinary outpost. Here, some of the sharpest technical minds in the U.S. military worked with advanced detection systems. On September 10, 1951, their equipment recorded something they could not explain. The first radar contact that morning, radar operators detected an unidentified object moving at extraordinary speed. The blip shot across the screen, far faster than any conventional aircraft. Within minutes, observers outside the lab also saw a disc-shaped object in the sky, glowing silver and maneuvering sharply before disappearing into the distance. The sighting was logged, reported, and dismissed as unidentified. But the story didn't end there. The second day, on September 11, the following day, the phenomenon repeated, only this time with more drama. At around 11 a.m., radar at Fort Monmouth again picked up a fast-moving target. The object appeared to hover, then shoot across the scope at incredible velocity. Meanwhile, nearby pilot cadets from the Army's Evans Signal Laboratory reported seeing a glowing disk in the sky. It appeared metallic, flat, and fast, darting in and out of clouds. One radar operator estimated the object climbed to 20,000 feet in seconds, far exceeding the performance of known aircraft. Fighter interception attempt word spread quickly through the chain of command. Within hours, an F-86 Sabre jet from nearby Mitchell Air Force Base was scrambled to intercept the unidentified target. The pilot later reported seeing a disc-shaped object reflecting sunlight. He attempted to close the distance, but the disc accelerated upward at impossible speed, vanishing from sight. The F-86 could reach more than 600 miles per hour, yet the pilot admitted he was outpaced instantly. The reports escalate now. The case was no longer a local anomaly. It involved radar confirmation, multiple ground witnesses, trained cadets, and a military pilot. The sightings and radar logs were quickly sent up the chain to Air Defense Command and then to the Air Force's UFO project, Project Grudge, which had been largely inactive at the time. For the Air Force, the Fort Monmouth case was a problem: too many credible witnesses, too many radar returns, and too much attention from within the military itself. General Cabell's steps in the reports reached General Charles Cabell, head of Air Force intelligence at the Pentagon. Disturbed by the case, Cabell demanded answers. According to declassified memos, he was angry that Project Grudge had not taken the incident seriously. He ordered a full investigation, calling the reports the most credible I have ever seen. This intervention would soon lead to major changes in the Air Force's handling of UFOs. Project Grudge's struggle: when investigators from Project Grudge arrived at Fort Monmouth, they interviewed radar operators, cadets, and officers. They reviewed logs, radar scope photos, and pilot statements. But their final explanation was underwhelming. The radar blips, they said, may have been caused by weather anomalies or temperature inversions. The glowing disks might have been conventional aircraft misidentified in sunlight. The F-86 pilot may have been chasing a reflection or optical illusion. These conclusions satisfied few. The witnesses, many of them technically trained, were unconvinced. The sheer speed and maneuverability described did not match atmospheric effects or conventional planes. The fallout General Cabell was reportedly furious at Project Grudge's dismissive stance. He believed the case highlighted the need for a more serious, scientific approach. Within months, Project Grudge was dismantled and replaced by Project Blue Book, the Air Force's long-running UFO investigation program. In this way, the Fort Monmouth incident indirectly reshaped the government's handling of UFOs. Why Fort Monmouth stood out: the case was unusual for several reasons: radar and visual confirmation. Both radar systems and human observers tracked the objects simultaneously. Multiple trained witnesses, cadets, radar technicians, and an Air Force pilot all reported similar details. Performance beyond aircraft, rapid acceleration, near-instant altitude changes, and silent hovering far exceeded 1951 technology. High-level attention: the case reached the Pentagon and triggered organizational changes. It was not just another UFO report. It was a military incident in restricted skies. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue that the case reflects Cold War nerves, radar glitches, and overexcited witnesses. Early radar systems were known to produce anomalies, and sunlight glints could easily trick observers. Believers, however, point to the convergence of evidence, radar, ground, and pilot confirmation, and the inability of experts to explain the object's performance. For them, Fort Monmouth remains one of the strongest UFO cases of the 1950s. Cultural context: the Fort Monmouth sightings came just months after the Lubbock lights in Texas, another high-profile case involving scientists and photographs. Together, they signaled a surge of UFO reports that would culminate in the dramatic Washington, D.C. sightings of 1952. In popular culture, the idea of flying discs was spreading fast. Science fiction films and magazines were filled with imagery of glowing saucers. Yet Fort Monmouth was not fiction, it was radar logs, fighter jets, and angry generals demanding answers. The legacy today: the Fort Monmouth UFO case remains officially unidentified. While skeptics lean on atmospheric explanations, the incident's impact on Air Force policy is undeniable. It directly influenced the creation of Project Blue Book, ensuring that UFO sightings would be systematically collected and studied for the next 2 decades. For researchers, it remains a case where the credibility of witnesses, the involvement of radar, and the failure of explanations leave the door open to mystery. Closing reflection: in September 1951, at a U.S. Army radar lab in New Jersey, unidentified objects performed maneuvers beyond human aircraft. They were tracked on radar, seen by cadets, and pursued by a fighter jet. Were they weather anomalies? Misidentified planes? Or something more? The Fort Monmouth case endures as a reminder that sometimes, even in the heart of the U.S. military, the skies deliver mysteries that cannot be explained away. The Tremonton UFO film, 16 objects in the Utah sky. In the summer of 1952, a U.S. Navy officer traveling through rural Utah captured what many call one of the clearest UFO films ever recorded. 16 glowing objects appeared in formation, maneuvering in ways that baffled experts. For years, the film was analyzed by the military and scientists alike, but never explained. This is the Tremonton UFO film, a case where the camera gave us more questions than answers. The setting: the date was July 2, 1952. The place, Tremonton, Utah, a quiet farming town in the northern part of the state. Lieutenant Delbert C. Newhouse, a chief photographer's mate with 20 years of service in the U.S. Navy, was driving with his wife and children. As a trained cameraman, he was familiar with aircraft, film, and photographic equipment. He also carried a 16mm Bell Howell movie camera in his car. On that morning, the sky over Utah delivered something extraordinary. The sighting at around 11 a.m., Newhouse's wife spotted strange objects in the sky. She pointed them out, a cluster of bright, silvery disks moving silently above the horizon. Newhouse stopped the car, stepped out, and began filming. For nearly 40 seconds, his camera captured 16 glowing objects flying in loose formation. The disks were circular, reflective, and appeared to maneuver in coordinated patterns. They were silent, with no contrails or visible propulsion. Newhouse later described them as looking like two pie pans, one inverted on top of the other. The footage showed a group of luminous objects crossing the clear Utah sky. At times, they flew in a loose arc, at other times, they formed clusters or paired off, as though under intelligent control. Unlike meteors or birds, the objects maintained steady speed and trajectory, with occasional sudden changes in direction. The film was sharp enough to rule out simple illusions, but not sharp enough to reveal fine structural details. Reporting the case initially, Newhouse kept the film private. But as UFO reports surged across the country, particularly during the famous Washington, D.C. sightings of July 1952, he decided to submit the footage to the military. He delivered the film to officials at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. From there, it was sent to Project Blue Book for analysis. The Air Force quickly recognized its significance. Unlike vague eyewitness accounts, the Tremonton film was hard visual evidence. The film was studied by Air Force photo analysts and later sent to the Naval Photographic Interpretation Center in Washington, D.C. Specialists compared the footage against known aircraft, balloons, and birds. They studied the motion frame by frame. Their conclusion: the objects were real, physical, and unidentified. They were not conventional aircraft, no wings, no engines, no contrails. They were not balloons, the objects maneuvered too rapidly and in coordinated groups. They were not birds, the formation and speed did not match. For once, the experts admitted, this was something they could not explain. Dr. Ruppelt and Project Blue Book Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, head of Project Blue Book, took a personal interest. He later described the Tremonton film as one of the best UFO films ever taken. Ruppelt's team emphasized the credibility of the witness. Newhouse was a Navy photographer with years of training, unlikely to be fooled by birds or reflections. His testimony, combined with the film, carried unusual weight. Scientific analyses: the film was also shown to civilian scientists, including panels organized by the Air Force. Some researchers suggested the objects could be birds reflecting sunlight, possibly seagulls. When birds banked and turned, they argued, they could produce flashes of light resembling disks. Others disagreed. Careful study of the motion suggested the objects maintained too much speed and consistency for birds. The formations also appeared more structured than natural flocks. The debate split scientists. Some leaned toward a natural explanation, others admitted the film showed objects of unknown origin. Public release: though initially classified, the Tremonton film was eventually shown to the public. In the mid-1950s, excerpts appeared in military briefings and later in documentaries. For UFO enthusiasts, it became a cornerstone case: a trained military photographer, a clear daytime sighting, multiple objects, and film evidence that resisted easy explanation. Skeptical challenges: skeptics continue to argue the film most likely shows birds. The apparent maneuvering could be illusions caused by the flock's natural movement. The disks, they argue, are simply reflections of sunlight on wings. Supporters counter that multiple expert analyses ruled out birds and balloons. They stress that Newhouse saw the objects with his own eyes before filming, and he described them as metallic disks, not birds. The cultural context: the Tremonton film came at a peak moment in UFO history. Just weeks later, UFOs would appear over Washington, D.C., tracked by radar and witnessed by airline crews. Together, these cases convinced many Americans that something extraordinary was happening in the skies. They also pushed the Air Force into a defensive position, offering explanations that satisfied few while continuing to classify evidence. The legacy today, the Tremonton UFO film remains one of the most studied visual cases in UFO history. Copies exist in archives, and researchers continue to debate its authenticity. For skeptics, it is a classic case of mistaken identity, birds caught in sunlight, filmed by chance. For believers, it is one of the clearest visual records of disc-shaped craft in the early UFO era. What makes the case enduring is the credibility of Delbert Newhouse. A Navy cameraman with no desire for publicity, he stood by his account until his death. Closing reflection on a quiet July morning in 1952, a Navy photographer stopped by the roadside in rural Utah and filmed a mystery that has lasted generations. 16 luminous objects, moving in silence and formation, crossed the Tremonton sky, and left behind a reel of film that defies explanation. Were they birds, balloons, or something beyond our technology? The Tremonton UFO film endures as a rare moment when mystery was captured frame by frame, a reminder that sometimes, the camera sees what we cannot understand. The Carson Sink UFO encounter. Jets meet the unknown. In the summer of 1952, two U.S. Air Force pilots flying a routine mission over Nevada reported seeing something extraordinary, three silver, delta-shaped craft flying in tight formation. They weren't on radar, they weren't in flight schedules, and they weren't like any aircraft known at the time. This is the Carson Sink UFO case, a close encounter between military pilots and unidentified craft at the height of the UFO wave. The date was July 24, 1952, just days after UFOs were reported over the nation's capital in the famous Washington, D.C. incident. Lieutenant Colonel John L. McGinn and Captain John R. Barton were flying a B-25 bomber on a cross-country training mission from Hamilton Air Force Base in California to Colorado Springs. The sky was clear as they approached Carson Sink, a broad desert basin northeast of Reno, Nevada. It was late morning, visibility was excellent, and the men were cruising at 11,000 feet. Then they saw them. The encounter at approximately 3 p.m., Barton noticed three bright objects ahead, flying at about 30,000 feet. Within seconds, the objects dropped altitude rapidly, leveling out at the pilot's own flight level. Now, the men could see them clearly, three silver-colored, delta-shaped craft, sharp and triangular, flying in a tight V formation. The objects had no tails, no cockpits, and no visible engines. Their surfaces gleamed in the sunlight, metallic and solid. McGinn and Barton were stunned. These were not aircraft they recognized, and both men were experienced aviators who knew U.S. and foreign planes well. Close past the formation of three unknown craft passed within 400 to 800 yards of the B-25, close enough for detailed observation. Barton later described them as shaped like a triangle with the apex at the rear, like a perfect delta. McGinn agreed, noting that they resembled no known jet or bomber. The objects moved swiftly, holding formation with precision, and then banked to the west. Within seconds, they shot away at tremendous speed, vanishing into the desert sky. The entire encounter lasted only moments, but it was enough to leave the pilots convinced they had seen something extraordinary. Reporting the sighting after landing, McGinn and Barton filed an official report with Air Defense Command. They stressed their certainty, the objects were real, structured, and not conventional aircraft. Both men emphasized their training and experience. They had flown combat missions in World War II and were familiar with every type of U.S. and Soviet aircraft then known. The delta-shaped craft they saw matched nothing in service in 1952. The report was quickly forwarded to Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program. Project Blue Book's challenge the Carson Sink sighting was troubling for Blue Book investigators. This was not a case of civilians misidentifying stars or weather balloons. It involved two military officers with extensive flight experience, flying in broad daylight with clear visibility. Adding to the credibility, both men provided detailed, consistent descriptions of the craft. Their accounts matched perfectly and were delivered with professional precision. Blue Book searched flight records for any aircraft that might explain the sighting. They found none. No scheduled military flights, no experimental tests, no commercial planes fit the description or location. Possible explanations. Several theories were considered. One experimental aircraft. In 1952, the Air Force was testing delta-wing designs, including early prototypes of the Convair F-102. Could the pilots have seen classified aircraft? Problem: records show no test flights in the Carson Sink area that day. Two misidentified jets. Skeptics suggested the pilots saw standard F-86 Sabres or other jets in unusual lighting. Problem: Barton and McGinn knew those aircraft intimately and insisted these were completely different. 3. Optical illusion. Some argued the pilots may have misjudged distance or shape, creating the impression of triangular craft. Problem: the close range of 400 to 800 yards made illusion unlikely. In the end, Project Blue Book listed the case as unidentified. Why the case stands out. The Carson Sink sighting is notable for several reasons. Highly credible witnesses. Both pilots were career military officers with spotless records. Clear conditions, broad daylight, clear skies, close range. Detailed descriptions. Both men agreed on the exact shape, color, and formation of the craft. No conventional explanation. No aircraft in U.S. or Soviet inventory at the time matched what was seen. For UFO researchers, it is a classic daylight disk case, except the disks were triangular. The delta-wing connection. One intriguing angle is the timing. In the early 1950s, U.S. and European engineers were beginning to experiment with delta-wing designs, triangular aircraft capable of high speeds. Some have suggested the Carson Sink UFOs were glimpses of secret prototypes. But even the most advanced prototypes of the time were not operational, and none were flying over Nevada that day. If they were experimental craft, they were far ahead of what was publicly acknowledged in 1952. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue the case reflects mistaken identification of jets, or perhaps classified aircraft that remain unacknowledged. To them, the mystery is simply a gap in records. Believers, however, emphasize the reliability of the witnesses and the performance of the objects. The precision formation, silent flight, and sudden acceleration suggest advanced technology, possibly not of human origin. Cultural context. The Carson Sink encounter occurred in the midst of the 1952 UFO wave, when sightings surged across the United States. Just days earlier, the Washington, D.C. UFO incidents had dominated headlines. Public anxiety was high, and Air Force officials were struggling to maintain credibility. In this climate, two respected pilots reporting triangular craft only fueled the sense that something extraordinary was happening in American skies. The legacy today, the Carson Sink case remains unexplained. It is often cited as one of the strongest pilot encounters of the 1950s, standing alongside the Mantell incident, the Gorman dogfight, and the Childs-Whitted sighting. For UFO historians, it is a rare case where trained military observers in daylight reported multiple unknown craft in close detail. The objects have never been identified, and no definitive explanation has emerged. Closing reflection. On a clear July afternoon in 1952, two Air Force officers flying a B-25 bomber crossed paths with three gleaming, triangular craft over Nevada. For a few seconds, the unknown flew close, silent, and undeniable, before vanishing at impossible speed. Were they secret aircraft, illusions of light, or something beyond our world? The Carson Sink encounter remains suspended in mystery, a fleeting meeting between human pilots and the unknown skies of the Cold War. The Farmington Armada, a sky filled with disks. In the spring of 1950, a small town in New Mexico became the scene of one of the most dramatic UFO sightings in history. Hundreds of witnesses looked up to see not one or two strange objects, but an entire fleet of disks maneuvering across the sky in broad daylight. This is the Farmington Armada, the day the skies over a desert town were filled with the unknown. The setting. The place was Farmington, New Mexico, a quiet community of about 3,000 people in the state's northwest corner. Surrounded by mesas and desert plains, Farmington was far from big cities or military test sites. The date was March 16, 1950. It was a clear morning, with bright sun and blue skies, perfect conditions for what was about to unfold. The first reports at around 11 a.m., townspeople began noticing strange objects overhead. They weren't airplanes, and they weren't weather balloons. Witnesses described shining, silver discs moving rapidly across the sky. The objects flew in formation, darted, and changed direction with uncanny speed. Soon, more and more residents saw them. Office workers, mechanics, housewives, and schoolchildren all stopped to stare. One witness later recalled, "They appeared to be saucer-shaped, and there must have been dozens of them, maybe more than 100. A sky full of discs, the numbers grew." Witnesses reported scores of objects, perhaps hundreds, filling the sky in loose formations. Some accounts described a dogfight in the air, as discs appeared to chase and circle each other before regrouping. Others said the discs moved with the precision of a military formation, gliding silently at high altitude. The sighting lasted nearly 2 hours. At times, the discs would fade into the distance, only to return in new groups. The town of Farmington became an impromptu observation deck, with hundreds of citizens pointing and shouting as the spectacle continued. The local newspaper report, the Farmington Daily Times, carried the headline the next day, "Huge Saucer Armada Jolts Farmington." The article reported that fully half of Farmington's population had seen the discs. It quoted witnesses describing dozens, even hundreds, of objects flying overhead. The newspaper called it the most spectacular saucer sighting of all time. Credible witnesses among those who reported the sighting were business owners, civic leaders, and professionals, people with reputations in the community. One of the most quoted was O.W. Pappy Henderson, a respected pilot and World War II veteran. He told the Daily Times that he had seen the discs clearly and had absolutely no doubt they were real objects. His testimony, along with dozens of others, gave the case unusual weight. This was not a single witness at night, it was a mass sighting in daylight by an entire town. Explanations considered as the story spread, skeptics and officials scrambled to explain what had happened in Farmington. Several theories emerged. One, high-altitude balloons. The U.S. was launching large numbers of weather and research balloons in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Could Farmington have seen a cluster drifting overhead? Problem: witnesses described high-speed maneuvers, sharp turns, and group formations, not drifting balloons. 2. Optical illusion. Some suggested the sighting was caused by reflections of the sun on high-altitude aircraft or even windblown debris. Problem: too many independent witnesses described solid, disc-shaped objects moving with intent. 3. Mass hysteria. Skeptics proposed that a few initial reports triggered a kind of psychological contagion, causing townspeople to interpret ordinary objects as UFOs. Problem: many witnesses reported detailed, consistent observations, and the sighting lasted too long to be mere fleeting illusion. Government silence. Unlike Roswell in 1947 or the Washington, D.C. incident in 1952, the Farmington Armada did not draw an immediate, visible military response. Project Blue Book later mentioned the case briefly but did not investigate in depth. Officially, the sighting was chalked up to possible balloon activity or misperceptions. For the residents of Farmington, however, such explanations rang hollow. Too many people had seen too much. The cultural context. The Farmington Armada occurred during a period of heightened UFO activity. Just weeks earlier, the famous McMinnville photographs had been taken in Oregon. Nationally, flying saucers were a hot topic. Headlines from 1947 onward had fueled speculation of extraterrestrial visitors. Yet nothing matched the scale of Farmington, an alleged fleet of UFOs witnessed by hundreds in broad daylight. For UFO researchers, it became one of the earliest and strongest mass sightings cases in U.S. history. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue the Farmington Armada was most likely caused by balloons launched from Project Skyhook or other programs. The desert air and bright sun could have exaggerated their appearance, creating the illusion of discs darting in the sky. Believers counter that experienced pilots and townsfolk alike reported fast, coordinated maneuvers far beyond balloons. To them, Farmington was a genuine fleet of unidentified craft, perhaps the largest UFO formation ever witnessed in America. The legacy today, the Farmington Armada remains one of the great mysteries of early UFO history. It stands out because, the sheer number of objects reported, not one or two, but dozens or even hundreds. The mass of witnesses, ordinary townspeople, children, professionals, and pilots alike. The daylight clarity of the sighting. While skeptics still lean toward balloons or mass misperception, the case is officially classified as unexplained. For researchers, it represents a rare moment when the unknown did not appear in isolation, but in overwhelming numbers. Closing reflection. On March 16, 1950, the people of Farmington looked up and saw the sky filled with shining disks. For hours, the objects danced, darted, and hovered, a spectacle etched into the memory of an entire town. Were they balloons, illusions, or an armada of craft from beyond? The Farmington incident endures as one of the most dramatic mass sightings in history, the day a desert sky became a stage for a fleet of mysteries. The Salem UFO photographs, twin discs over the Navy base in the summer of 1952, at the peak of America's greatest UFO wave, two Navy officers in Massachusetts took a pair of photographs that remain among the most striking images in UFO history. The photos show two luminous discs in daylight, hovering over the coastline, solid, structured, and undeniable. This is the Salem UFO case, the story of two photographs that captured the mystery of the skies. The setting. The place was Salem, Massachusetts, home to the U.S. Coast Guard Air Station. The date was July 16, 1952, just days before the famous Washington, D.C. radar visual incidents that would grip the world. At around 9:30 a.m., Coast Guard Seaman Shell R. Alpert was on duty at the base's Public Information Office. With him was Yeoman 3rd Class Thomas Flaherty. Outside, the summer sky was bright and clear, with only a few wisps of cloud. Then the men noticed something unusual. The sighting. According to Alpert, four strange objects appeared in the sky. They glowed with an intense brilliance, round and metallic in appearance, and moved slowly in formation. At first, he thought they might be reflections, but their sharp definition and steady flight suggested otherwise. Quickly, Alpert grabbed his Graflex camera and snapped a photo through the office window. Seconds later, he opened the window and captured a second image directly. What he photographed became some of the most iconic UFO images of the 20th century. The two photographs show luminous disks against a partly cloudy morning sky. In the first image, taken through glass, four objects are visible, though somewhat faint. In the second, only two disks remain, bright and clearly defined. The objects are circular, glowing at the edges, with a solid central structure. They appear suspended in the air, evenly spaced. Unlike blurred nighttime shots or indistinct streaks, the Salem photos captured daylight disks, structured objects in clear conditions. Witness testimony. Both Alpert and Flaherty reported that they saw the objects with the naked eye before and during the photographs. They described them as bright, metallic disks that moved in formation, hovering briefly before vanishing at high speed. Alpert later said, "I watched them carefully. They weren't reflections. They were there, real and solid." Their testimony was simple, direct, and consistent. The photographs go public. The images were quickly developed and submitted to the Coast Guard, then circulated to newspapers. Within days, they appeared in major outlets, including the International News Service. The timing amplified their impact. The photos emerged just before the dramatic UFO radar incidents over Washington, D.C. later that July. Together, they fueled a national frenzy. For the public, the Salem photographs were visual proof, not just stories of lights in the sky, but tangible images of disks. Military and Project Blue Book interest. The U.S. Air Force's UFO investigation program, Project Blue Book, examined the photographs. Analysts studied the negatives for evidence of tampering, double exposure, or reflections. Their conclusion: the negatives were genuine. No evidence of trickery was found. The photos showed real objects in the sky. But what those objects were remained a matter of dispute. Explanations considered. 1. Reflections on glass. Some skeptics argued the discs in the first photo were reflections of interior lights on the office window. Problem: the second photo, taken outside the window, still shows two distinct discs. 2. Aircraft or balloons. Could the objects have been conventional planes or weather balloons? Their shape, brilliance, and sudden disappearance made this unlikely. 3. Optical effects. Some suggested lens flare or photographic anomalies. But again, the witnesses insisted they saw the discs with their eyes first, then captured them on film. Scientific analyses. The photos were studied by civilian investigators as well as the Air Force. In the 1950s, the UFO research group NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, declared the images authentic and unexplained. Later, in the 1960s, the Condon Committee also reviewed them but leaned toward reflection or flare as possible explanations. Still, the original negatives showed no manipulation. If they were reflections, they were unusually sharp and symmetrical. Witness credibility. Shell Alpert and Thomas Flaherty were both enlisted Navy personnel with no motive to hoax. They gained no profit or publicity from the photographs. In fact, Alpert expressed regret at the attention, saying he never expected the images to cause such a sensation. For many researchers, this reluctance reinforced his credibility. Cultural impact. The Salem UFO photographs became part of the core visual canon of UFO history. Reprinted in books, magazines, and documentaries, they were cited alongside the McMinnville photos and the Great Falls film as some of the strongest photographic evidence. For the American public, they helped solidify the image of UFOs as metallic discs, hovering in daylight, seen and photographed by ordinary service members. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue the Salem photos are most likely reflections or lens artifacts. The fact that the first photo was taken through glass adds to their doubt. Believers emphasize that the second photo, taken outdoors, still shows structured discs. They argue that the negatives were tested, the witnesses were credible, and no conventional explanation fits. The legacy. More than 70 years later, the Salem UFO photographs remain unexplained. They are still cited in UFO studies as some of the clearest daylight disc photos ever taken. Though skeptics continue to question them, no definitive debunking has ever been accepted. For researchers, the Salem photos stand as a reminder of the 1952 wave, a summer when the skies above America seemed alive with mystery. Closing reflection. On a quiet July morning in 1952, two Coast Guard men in Salem raised a camera and captured history. Two bright discs hovered in the sky, silent and gleaming, before vanishing forever. Were they reflections, balloons, or something far more extraordinary? The negatives endure, silent witnesses to a moment when the unknown revealed itself in broad daylight, and left behind photographs that still defy explanation. The Nash-Fortenberry sighting, formation of lights over Virginia. On a warm summer night in 1952, two veteran airline pilots flying over Virginia encountered something extraordinary. 6 glowing discs flew in tight formation, maneuvering with precision and speed unlike any known aircraft. For the pilots, it was an encounter so vivid and undeniable that they went public immediately, and their report became one of the strongest cases in UFO history. This is the Nash-Fortenberry sighting, a night when the unknown kept pace with a passenger plane. The setting. The date was July 14, 1952. The location, skies over Chesapeake Bay, Virginia. Captain William B. Nash and co-pilot William H. Fortenberry were flying a Douglas DC-4 passenger airliner for Pan American Airways. The plane had departed New York and was en route to Miami, cruising at 8,000 feet. The night was clear and calm, with excellent visibility. It was the kind of flying weather pilots appreciate, predictable, uneventful. But at around 8:10 p.m., the routine gave way to mystery. The encounter. Both men suddenly noticed a formation of 6 glowing objects approaching from the west. The lights were fiery orange-red, disc-shaped, and flying in perfect line abreast formation, side by side, evenly spaced. Nash and Fortenberry estimated the objects were each about 100 feet in diameter. They flew silently, glowing like hot metal, and reflected against the haze in the lower atmosphere. The pilots watched as the formation executed a sharp 30-degree turn, maintaining perfect alignment throughout the maneuver. Then, in unison, the discs tilted on edge, showing their flattened profiles, before leveling out again. Seconds later, 2 additional discs joined the formation, merging seamlessly with the others. The 8 objects then accelerated at tremendous speed and disappeared into the night sky. The entire sighting lasted about 12 to 15 seconds, but for 2 trained pilots, it was long enough to leave a lasting impression. Immediate reactions: Nash and Fortenberry were stunned. Both men were experienced airline pilots with thousands of flight hours. They knew conventional aircraft, meteors, and reflections. What they had seen was none of those things. Nash later said, "The entire formation of discs gave a feeling of controlled, purposeful flight. They had a definite plan, a definite arrangement." As soon as they landed in Miami, the pilots filed detailed reports with the Civil Aeronautics Administration, CAA, and the Air Force's Project Blue Book. Witness credibility: the strength of the case lies heavily in the credibility of the witnesses. Captain William Nash was a decorated Pan-American pilot with years of transoceanic flight experience. William Fortenberry was equally seasoned, serving as his trusted co-pilot on international routes. Both men had reputations for professionalism and calm judgment. Neither sought publicity, and both delivered consistent, detailed testimony under questioning. For UFO researchers, the Nash-Fortenberry sighting became a gold standard case: highly trained observers, clear conditions, and detailed descriptions. Project Blue Book's investigation: the Air Force took the sighting seriously. Investigators interviewed the pilots extensively and analyzed their reports. Their conclusion: the sighting was unidentified. While some officials suggested the objects might have been meteor fragments or reflections, these explanations failed under scrutiny. Meteors do not fly in perfect formation, make sharp turns, or join together in coordinated maneuvers. The Nash-Fortenberry case was logged as one of the most significant unknowns in Project Blue Book's files. Possible explanations considered: meteors can appear fiery orange and streak across the sky. But they do not fly in formations, execute controlled turns, or merge into groups. Aircraft: could the pilots have misidentified military jets? In 1952, no known aircraft could fly silently, maintain fiery luminosity, and maneuver in tight, perfectly aligned groups at such speeds. Optical illusions: reflections of ground lights or atmospheric mirages were considered. But Nash and Fortenberry described structured discs with clear edges and coordinated movement. None of the conventional explanations fit. The 1952 UFO wave: the Nash-Fortenberry sighting occurred just 5 days before the famous Washington, D.C. UFO incidents of July 19 to 20, 1952, when objects were tracked on radar and seen by airline pilots over the Capitol. Together, these cases fed into the Summer of the Saucers, a period when UFO sightings surged across the United States, dominating headlines and forcing the Air Force to address the phenomenon in unprecedented public detail. The pilots go public. Unlike many witnesses who remained silent out of fear of ridicule, Nash and Fortenberry chose to go public. They gave interviews, appeared in newspapers, and defended their testimony vigorously. Nash in particular rejected skeptics who dismissed the sighting as illusion or meteors. He insisted the objects were real, structured craft under intelligent control. The courage of the pilots in standing by their account gave the case unusual longevity in the public eye. Skeptics versus believers: skeptics argue the sighting may have been an unusual meteor shower magnified by atmospheric conditions. The rapid appearance and disappearance of fiery objects, they suggest, could have created the impression of maneuvering. Believers, however, stress the precision of the formation, the sharp turns, and the merging of additional objects. These are behaviors far beyond meteors or illusions. For them, Nash and Fortenberry witnessed advanced craft operating in U.S. airspace. Cultural impact: the Nash-Fortenberry case quickly entered UFO lore. It was featured in books, lectures, and Air Force discussions as one of the most credible sightings of the 1950s. The image of glowing discs flying in formation became part of the cultural template of UFO reports, shaping how later witnesses described their own encounters. For Pan American Airways, the incident was awkward. Two of its top pilots were speaking openly about flying saucers. But the men's professionalism ensured their reputations remained intact. The legacy today, the Nash Fortenberry sighting is still considered one of the best documented airline pilot UFO encounters of the 20th century. Its enduring strength comes from two highly credible witnesses. A clear, detailed description of structured objects. Maneuvers inconsistent with conventional explanations. The Air Force could not solve it in 1952. Researchers cannot solve it today. Closing reflection on a quiet July night in 1952, two airline pilots looked out their cockpit windows and saw a formation of discs racing through the Virginia sky. They glowed like fire, flew with precision, and vanished at impossible speed. Were they meteors, illusions, or something beyond human technology? The Nash Fortenberry sighting remains a mystery of discipline and credibility, a moment when two seasoned aviators bore witness to the extraordinary. The Santa Barbara Channel USOs, discs beneath the waves along the southern coast of California. The stretch of water between Santa Barbara and the Channel Islands is known for its beauty and its mystery. In the early 1950s, this channel became the scene of repeated reports of strange craft, not only in the skies but beneath the waves. These were not UFOs alone, but USOs, unidentified submerged objects. This is the story of the Santa Barbara Channel sightings of 1951 and 1952, cases that blurred the line between the sea and the sky. The Santa Barbara Channel is a 70-mile stretch of water separating the California mainland from the Channel Islands. It is deep, with strong currents, and during World War II it became an important military training and patrol zone. By the early 1950s, as Cold War anxieties grew, the waters were regularly monitored by the Navy, the Coast Guard, and commercial pilots flying between Los Angeles and San Francisco. It was in this heavily traveled region that strange things began to appear. The 1951 reports. In the summer of 1951, multiple airline pilots reported seeing disc-shaped objects over the channel. Navy radar operators at Point Mugu Naval Air Station tracked fast-moving objects diving into the water and emerging again. Local fishermen reported glowing shapes beneath the waves, moving silently at speeds no submarine could match. Airline crews flying the Los Angeles-San Francisco route described luminous discs pacing their aircraft as they crossed the coastline near Santa Barbara. These sightings suggested that whatever the phenomenon was, it operated in both air and sea. The 1952 surge. By early 1952, the sightings intensified. In one of the most famous accounts, a Pan American Airways crew flying along the coast spotted multiple glowing discs hovering over the water, then plunging straight down into the ocean. Moments later, they re-emerged and shot skyward. Another case involved a Navy patrol plane observing glowing, circular objects maneuvering beneath the surface, moving far faster than any known submarine. Some reports described formations of discs, echoing the Armada sightings seen elsewhere in the skies in the early 1950s. Radar and sonar contacts. What made the Santa Barbara Channel cases stand out was not only eyewitness testimony, but also instrument confirmation. Radar operators at naval stations and on ships logged unidentified targets entering and leaving the ocean at extreme speeds. Sonar operators reported objects moving underwater at hundreds of knots, speeds physically impossible for submarines of the time. For the Navy, these reports raised immediate concerns. Were these Soviet craft, advanced weapons, or something entirely unknown? Navy secrecy. The U.S. Navy investigated quietly. Unlike the Air Force, which had Project Blue Book for aerial UFOs, the Navy had no public program for USOs. Reports were logged, but most were classified. To this day, many Santa Barbara Channel incidents remain buried in Navy archives. What has emerged comes largely from pilot testimony, leaked logs, and civilian accounts. Witness testimony. One pilot recalled, "We were flying north along the coast when we saw a group of glowing discs hovering above the water. Suddenly they dropped into the sea with no splash at all, like they were entering a doorway. Minutes later, they shot back into the air and vanished. A fisherman described, "There was a bright, circular light moving under the waves. It wasn't a submarine. It was too fast, too smooth. Then it rose up and disappeared into the sky." Such testimony gave the phenomenon a dual nature, not just aerial, but oceanic. Possible explanations considered: 1. Submarines. Could the objects have been Soviet subs? In the early 1950s, U.S. intelligence tracked Soviet submarine activity closely. But the reported speeds, hundreds of knots, were impossible for the technology of the era. 2. Experimental craft. Some suggested the Navy itself was testing advanced submersibles or aircraft. Yet no known U.S. projects matched the descriptions. 3. Natural phenomena. Bioluminescent sea life, undersea currents, or reflections might explain some reports. But they do not account for radar/sonar contacts, nor the disks that emerged from water into air. In the end, none of these explanations satisfied the witnesses, especially trained Navy personnel. Connection to other UFO cases. The Santa Barbara Channel USO reports came at the same time as major UFO waves across the U.S., the Lubbock Lights, August 1951. The Washington, D.C. incidents, July 1952. The Tremonton and Salem photographs, 1952. In each case, glowing disks appeared in formation, often tracked by radar. The channel reports echoed this pattern, but added the dimension of submersion, suggesting that the same craft operated seamlessly in both mediums. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue the reports were likely a mix of aircraft, balloons, and misidentified natural lights, exaggerated by Cold War tension. Believers counter that Navy radar and sonar confirmations, combined with dozens of pilot and fisherman testimonies, cannot be dismissed so easily. To them, the Santa Barbara Channel remains one of the strongest cases of USOs, advanced craft with capabilities beyond human technology. Cultural impact. Though less famous than Roswell or Washington, D.C., the Santa Barbara Channel cases shaped UFO research. They established the concept of the USO, unidentified submerged object, and suggested that the phenomenon was not confined to the skies. Later UFO waves, including incidents near Puerto Rico, the Arctic, and Russia's Lake Baikal, echoed the same theme: mysterious craft operating freely in both water and air. For California residents, the channel became a place of lore, a silent stage where glowing disks moved between worlds. The legacy today, the Santa Barbara Channel USO sightings remain unresolved. Many details are lost in Navy archives, but the consistent pattern of reports from 1951 to 52 stands as evidence of something extraordinary. They remind us that UFO mysteries are not only above us, but also below, in the oceans that cover most of our planet. Closing reflection. Between 1951 and 1952, airline crews, Navy operators, and fishermen all watched as glowing disks appeared above the Santa Barbara Channel, then plunged into the water, moving faster than submarines, only to rise again into the skies. Were they secret craft, illusions, or something not of this earth? The Santa Barbara USO cases endure as a rare glimpse of a phenomenon that defies boundaries, a mystery not only of the heavens, but of the deep. The Niagara Falls UFO, a disk above the gorge in the summer of 1952, one of the world's most famous landmarks, became the stage for an extraordinary encounter. Tourists and locals alike gazed in shock as a glowing disk hovered above Niagara Falls, maneuvering in full daylight. This is the Niagara Falls UFO incident, the mystery that turned a natural wonder into a backdrop for the unexplained. The setting: the year was 1952, the peak of America's great UFO wave. Across the United States, pilots, radar operators, and ordinary citizens were reporting disks in the skies. Niagara Falls, straddling the border between New York and Ontario, was no stranger to spectacle. Millions visited each year to marvel at the cascading water and roaring mist. But in midsummer, visitors were treated to something entirely different: a flying disc in broad daylight. The sighting: according to contemporary reports, the incident occurred on a clear afternoon. Witnesses described a round, metallic object hovering silently above the gorge, positioned just beyond the mist of the falls. The object reflected sunlight with a silvery brilliance. Some described it as a classic disc shape, with a domed top and a flattened base. It moved slowly, as if observing, before darting suddenly across the sky with incredible speed. Tourists on both the US and Canadian sides of the border stopped to watch. Several claimed the object hovered for minutes at a time, tilting slightly before shooting off at an angle. Multiple witnesses. What gave the Niagara Falls case weight was the number and diversity of witnesses. Tourists standing along the railings of Prospect Point in New York reported seeing the disc. Locals in Ontario also saw the object from across the river. Some claimed it was visible long enough for crowds to gather, pointing and shouting as it moved against the backdrop of the falls. Though no photographs are known to exist, the consistency of testimony across two nations made the case hard to ignore. Government interest at the time, UFO sightings were flooding into official channels. The Air Force's Project Blue Book was already stretched thin by hundreds of cases, especially in the wake of the Washington, D.C. radar incidents of July 1952. While no detailed Blue Book file survives for Niagara Falls, newspaper clippings and local reports show the sighting was logged and discussed by investigators. For officials, the timing was problematic. A major tourist attraction, filled with visitors, had just hosted a public UFO sighting in broad daylight. Witness descriptions. The accounts varied slightly but shared core details: shape, disc-like, metallic, with a rounded top. Size, larger than a small aircraft when viewed against the falls. Color, bright silver, reflecting sunlight, glowing at times with a whitish haze. Movement, hovering, tilting, then rapid acceleration at sharp angles. One tourist recalled, "At first, I thought it was a plane catching the sun. But then it stopped dead still in the sky. No plane can do that." Another said, "The way it darted away, it was gone in a blink, faster than anything I've ever seen." Explanations considered one aircraft. Some speculated the object could have been a conventional airplane reflecting sunlight. But no planes were logged in the immediate area, and the hovering behavior did not match. Two weather balloons were common explanations in 1952. But balloons drift, they do not hover, tilt, and then shoot off at right angles. 3. Optical illusion. Mist and sunlight around Niagara Falls often create rainbows and strange light effects. Could the disc have been a trick of the eye? Witnesses rejected this, insisting they saw a structured, metallic craft. For extraterrestrial craft. For believers, the Niagara Falls disc was part of the broader 1952 wave, another appearance of advanced, unknown technology in U.S. skies. The broader context. The Niagara Falls sighting did not happen in isolation. That summer, the U.S. experienced a surge in UFO reports. July 1952, the Washington, D.C. UFO incidents, tracked on radar and chased by jets. July 1952, the Nash-Fortenberry Airline sighting off Chesapeake Bay. July 1952, the Salem photographs in Massachusetts. July 1952, the Tremonton film in Utah. The Niagara Falls case fit perfectly into this wave, a public, daylight sighting during a time of unprecedented UFO activity. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue the Niagara Falls incident was likely a misidentified plane, balloon, or optical effect amplified by tourist excitement. Without photographs or official reports, they dismiss it as anecdotal. Believers, however, point to the consistency of multiple independent witnesses, the daylight clarity, and the disc's impossible maneuvers. To them, Niagara Falls was visited by the same phenomenon seen across America that summer: structured, intelligent craft of unknown origin. Cultural impact. While not as widely publicized as Washington or Roswell, the Niagara Falls UFO became part of local folklore. Residents of the region still reference it in discussions of unexplained phenomena around the falls. The idea of a glowing disk above one of the world's most recognizable landmarks has since inspired books, documentaries, and speculation about why UFOs seem drawn to prominent natural and cultural sites. The legacy today, the Niagara Falls UFO of 1952 remains a daylight disk sighting with multiple witnesses but little official follow-up. It stands out for its location, not in an isolated desert or military base, but above a global tourist attraction where hundreds could see it at once. The lack of photographs has kept it from becoming iconic, but for UFO historians, it represents another key piece of the extraordinary summer of 1952. Closing reflection on a bright summer day, tourists at Niagara Falls looked up and saw a shining disk hovering above the roar of the water. For minutes, the impossible became visible, a structured craft, silent and gleaming, before vanishing into the sky. Was it illusion, misidentification, or a visitor from beyond? The Niagara Falls UFO remains one of the most dramatic public sightings of the great 1952 wave, a reminder that sometimes the extraordinary reveals itself not in secret places, but in front of the world's most famous stage. The Santa Ana UFO photograph, a disc over California in the mid-1960s, Southern California was a hub of aerospace innovation. Jets thundered from nearby bases, NASA tested rockets, and the Cold War pushed technology to new heights. Yet in the summer of 1965, something appeared in the skies that no engineer could explain. A single photograph, taken in Santa Ana, captured a disc-shaped object hanging above the horizon, clear, structured, and enduring as one of the most debated UFO images ever produced. This is the Santa Ana UFO photograph of 1965, a mystery frozen in film. The setting the place was Santa Ana, California, a growing city in Orange County just south of Los Angeles. By the 1960s, the region was thick with defense contractors, aerospace firms, and military facilities. The date was August 3, 1965. Across the United States, UFO reports were peaking. That same year, sightings were logged in Texas, Oklahoma, and the Midwest, with some of the largest waves since the great UFO flaps of the 1950s. It was against this backdrop that a California resident aimed a camera skyward, and captured an image that would become an icon. The photograph, the Santa Ana photograph, shows a classic disc-shaped object in daylight. Against the blue sky, the UFO appears metallic, with a rounded dome on top and a flattened underside. Unlike blurred nighttime shots, this image is sharp and well-defined. The disc is clearly separate from the horizon, with crisp edges and a distinct, structured form. The photographer, whose name has been recorded in various reports as an anonymous Southern California resident, claimed the object was visible long enough to raise the camera, focus, and snap a picture before it moved away. The image spreads. The photograph first circulated locally, then nationally. It was published in newspapers, UFO newsletters, and eventually in books that chronicled mid-century UFO evidence. For the public, the Santa Ana image was striking. It wasn't a streak of light or a vague blur. It looked like a solid craft, hovering above Southern California, the heart of America's aerospace industry. Official and civilian investigations. The photograph caught the attention of both civilian researchers and government analysts. NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, one of the leading civilian UFO groups of the time, catalogued the image as authentic and unexplained. Independent photo analysts studied enlargements of the negative. They found no evidence of double exposure, tampering, or photographic trickery. The object cast natural light and shadow consistent with the sunny conditions. The Air Force's Project Blue Book also logged the case. Their analysts noted the sharpness of the image but suggested, without conclusive proof, that it might depict a small object thrown into the air, such as a model or hubcap. Witness testimony. Though the photo was taken by a single individual, the witness insisted the disc was real, metallic, and hovering silently. He described the object as moving slowly before shooting away at high speed. No sound, contrail, or conventional features such as wings or engines were visible. For researchers, the combination of the clear photograph and the simple, consistent testimony made the case stand out. Possible explanations considered: one, hoax. A thrown object. Skeptics suggested the disc could have been a hubcap, plate, or other small object tossed into the air. Problem: analysts found the focus and scale inconsistent with a close object. The disc appeared farther away, not in the near field of the lens. 2, aircraft or balloon. Could it have been an experimental aircraft or balloon? Southern California skies were filled with both. But no known designs matched the saucer-like shape in the photo. 3. Optical illusion lens flare, reflections, or airborne debris might explain some UFO photos. But the Santa Ana image showed a structured object, not a light anomaly. In the end, none of the conventional explanations fully accounted for the photograph. Why the photo endures. The Santa Ana photograph remains significant for several reasons. Clarity: unlike many UFO images, it shows a sharp, structured object. Timing: it was taken during the 1965 UFO wave, when sightings surged across America. Location: Southern California, home to major aerospace and defense industries, added intrigue. Why was a disc-shaped craft hovering above the very center of U.S. aircraft research? Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics maintain the image is most likely a hoax, a thrown object photographed to resemble a disc. They point to the lack of multiple witnesses and the simplicity of such a trick. Believers, however, emphasize the photo's sharpness, the lack of evidence of fakery, and the witness's testimony of real, structured flight. To them, the Santa Ana photograph is one of the strongest daylight disc cases on record. Cultural impact: the Santa Ana UFO photograph joined the ranks of iconic images like the McMinnville photos, 1950, and the Salem photos, 1952. It appeared in books, documentaries, and UFO archives throughout the 1960s and 1970s, reinforcing the public image of flying saucers as domed, metallic discs. In UFO literature, it became shorthand for the era, a symbol of the clean, classic saucer shape. The legacy today, more than half a century later, the Santa Ana UFO photograph is still cited in UFO research. It is officially unexplained. Though skeptics dismiss it as a likely hoax, no definitive debunking has ever been accepted. The negative, the sharp image, and the witness's account leave the case unresolved. It remains one of the clearest visual records of the saucer era, a single frame that captures the enduring mystery of UFOs. Closing reflection: on a sunny day in 1965, above the suburbs of Southern California, a photographer captured an image that has puzzled researchers for decades. A disc hung in the sky, metallic, silent, undeniable on film. Was it a hoax, a misidentified object, or something truly extraordinary? The Santa Ana photograph endures as a frozen moment in UFO history, one clear image that defies easy explanation, reminding us that sometimes the truth hovers just beyond reach. The Taormina UFO photographs, discs over Sicily. In the summer of 1954, two men vacationing on the Sicilian coast captured a pair of photographs that have endured as some of Europe's most famous UFO images. Against the backdrop of Mount Etna, two disc-shaped objects appeared in daylight, silent and metallic. This is the Taormina UFO case, a mystery preserved in two striking photographs. The setting: the place was Taormina, a historic town on the eastern coast of Sicily, perched high above the Mediterranean. The date was June 27, 1954. Italy in the 1950s was experiencing a wave of UFO reports, with sightings spreading across Europe during what became known as the Great UFO Flap of 1954. The phenomenon was no longer just an American story, it was global. On that bright June afternoon, two men stepped outside to take in the view of Mount Etna. What they captured on film became iconic. The photographers: the men were photographer Luciano Galli and journalist Nico Menichino. According to their account, they were on holiday in Taormina, enjoying the clear view of Mount Etna in the distance. Galli had brought along his camera, intending to take scenic photographs of the Sicilian landscape. As he lined up a shot, something unusual appeared in the sky. The sighting: both men saw two disc-shaped objects flying above Mount Etna. They were metallic, reflective, and moved in loose formation. Startled, Galli raised his camera and snapped two photographs in quick succession. The objects appeared oval or saucer-like, tilted slightly, as though banking. They showed no wings, tails, or contrails, only smooth, structured discs against the sky. After hovering briefly, the objects reportedly shot off at high speed, vanishing from view. The two photographs remain the core of the case. In the first image, the disks appear farther apart, slightly angled, with sunlight glinting from their surfaces. In the second, taken moments later, the objects are closer together, aligned as if moving in formation. Both photographs show the Sicilian landscape below, with the snow-capped summit of Mount Etna visible in the distance. The objects stand out sharply against the clear sky. For researchers, the images were compelling, structured, daylight discs captured on film, not just in words. Publication and reaction. The photographs were quickly published in Italian newspapers, including Giornale di Sicilia. The images also spread internationally, appearing in magazines and UFO journals across Europe and the United States. For the public, the photos seemed to confirm what thousands were reporting across Italy that year: the skies were alive with discs. Official and civilian investigations. Unlike in the U.S., where Project Blue Book cataloged sightings, Italy had no centralized government UFO program in 1954. Civilian groups, however, quickly analyzed the photos. Enlargements showed the objects had clear outlines, no signs of being birds, balloons, or airborne debris. The negatives were examined and found to be consistent with unaltered exposures. Skeptics suggested the objects could have been thrown objects, stones, plates, or models tossed into the air. But the size, clarity, and distance in the photographs argued against a close-range trick. The 1954 Italian UFO wave. The Taormina photographs became one of the most famous cases of the 1954 European UFO wave. That autumn, Italy, France, and other countries saw massive waves of sightings. Crowds in Florence reported discs hovering over a soccer stadium. Pilots across Europe logged glowing lights pacing their aircraft. Farmers and townsfolk described close encounters with landed craft. In this context, the Taormina photographs were more than isolated curiosities, they were part of a continental surge of UFO reports. Witness credibility. Both Galli and Menechino stood by their account for decades. Galli, a professional photographer, insisted the negatives were genuine and that he had captured real, physical objects in the sky. Menechino, as a journalist, reported the story publicly, lending credibility to the account. Neither man profited from the photographs, and both consistently repeated the same details when asked about the incident. Explanations considered: one, thrown objects/hoax. Skeptics argue the photos may have been staged using tossed models. Problem: the sharpness of the discs and their distance relative to Mount Etna made this explanation less convincing. 2 aircraft. Could they have been planes viewed at an odd angle? Italy's skies were busy, but the discs showed no wings, tails, or contrails. 3 balloons or debris. Balloons were often suggested in 1950s cases. But these objects appeared metallic, structured, and maneuvering. 4 unidentified craft. For many UFO researchers, the Taormina photos represented genuine, unknown aerial vehicles, consistent with disc reports worldwide. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics continue to view the Taormina photos as likely hoaxes, pointing out how easily disc-like objects could be faked with simple tricks. Believers, however, emphasize the credibility of the witnesses, the clarity of the negatives, and the broader context of the 1954 European UFO wave. For them, the Taormina images remain some of the strongest photographic evidence of disc-shaped craft. Cultural impact. The Taormina photographs became staples of UFO literature. They were reprinted in books, magazines, and documentaries for decades, often alongside the McMinnville, 1950, Great Falls, 1950, and Salem, 1952, images. In Italy, the case became part of national folklore, one of the most famous UFO encounters ever reported in the country. Even today, the images are referenced whenever discussions of the 1954 wave arise. The legacy. More than 60 years later, the Taormina UFO photographs remain unexplained. While skeptics lean toward hoax or misidentification, no definitive debunking has ever been universally accepted. The photos continue to occupy a place of prominence in UFO archives, not only for their clarity but for their role in a global surge of sightings. For researchers, they are a reminder of a time when the skies seemed full of discs, captured not only in memory but on film. Closing reflection on a summer day in 1954, two men stood on a Sicilian hillside, admiring Mount Etna, when the extraordinary appeared above them. Two discs, metallic and silent, hovered in formation, captured forever in two photographs that still defy explanation. Were they hoaxes, misidentifications, or genuine glimpses of something beyond human technology? The Taormina photographs endure as icons of the saucer era, two frozen images of a mystery that refuses to fade. The Santa Barbara luminous discs, lights over the California coast in the summer of 1953, residents along California's central coast looked to the night sky and witnessed something extraordinary. Multiple luminous discs appeared in formation, glowing with an eerie brilliance, maneuvering in silence over the Santa Barbara Channel. This is the story of the Santa Barbara luminous discs of 1953, a mystery that blurred the line between natural phenomena and technology beyond our understanding. The setting, the Santa Barbara Channel, between the California mainland and the Channel Islands, has long been a place of mystery. Deep waters, strong currents, and heavy naval activity made it a hub of both scientific research and military surveillance in the mid-20th century. By the early 1950s, UFO reports were already common along the California coast. In 1951 and 1952, Navy radar operators and airline pilots had reported unidentified craft diving into and emerging from the channel, cases now remembered as early USO, unidentified submerged object, reports. But in 1953, the phenomenon shifted from the sea to the skies, luminous discs that seemed to command the heavens. The first sightings, the accounts began on a clear summer evening. Local residents, strolling along the beaches of Santa Barbara and Ventura, reported seeing multiple glowing discs crossing the night sky. They were described as circular, shining with a bluish-white or orange hue, and moving in formation. Unlike meteors, they did not streak or fragment. Instead, they hovered, regrouped, and performed sharp turns before vanishing into the distance. Fishermen on boats off the coast described the lights as silent and deliberate, unlike any aircraft they had ever seen. Multiple witnesses' reports came not only from civilians, but also from airline crews flying coastal routes and even naval personnel stationed at nearby bases. Airline pilots reported formations of luminous discs pacing their aircraft at high altitude. Local residents described seeing up to a dozen glowing objects moving in tight groups. Military observers noted unusual radar activity that coincided with the visual reports. The consistency of testimony gave the case unusual credibility. These were not isolated sightings, they were broad, public displays witnessed by dozens across the region. Descriptions of the objects witnesses described the luminous discs with striking similarity, shape, round, disc-like, sometimes glowing brighter at the edges. Color, ranging from brilliant white to orange-red, with some shifting between hues. Behavior, hovering, regrouping, accelerating to high speeds, and executing abrupt right-angle turns. Formation, often flying in clusters of 3 to 12, as though coordinated. One witness in Santa Barbara said, "They looked like glowing coins in the sky, not stars, not planes, but solid, round things, moving with precision." The naval angle, the proximity of sightings to naval facilities, including Point Mugu Naval Air Station, raised questions. Were these experimental aircraft? Secret tests of new propulsion systems? Yet the maneuvers described, instantaneous accelerations and abrupt changes in direction, exceeded the capabilities of any known U.S. or Soviet craft in 1953. Privately, some Navy officers admitted they were baffled. Unofficially, the sightings were logged as unidentified. Public reaction: the Santa Barbara sightings quickly made local headlines. Newspapers referred to them as flying saucers or mystery discs, echoing the language of the nationwide UFO wave just a year earlier in 1952. For Californians, the idea that discs were appearing over both land and sea added to the mystery. Was the channel not only a naval zone, but also a corridor for unknown craft? Explanations considered one aircraft. Some suggested the lights were conventional planes reflecting sunlight or exhaust plumes. Problem: witnesses reported silent flight, hovering, and abrupt maneuvers inconsistent with jets or propeller craft. Two balloons, weather balloons, were a common explanation. But the coordinated formations and rapid movements argued against drifting balloons. 3 astronomical phenomena. Could bright planets or meteors explain the sightings? Unlikely, since the disks were observed maneuvering, regrouping, and changing course. For experimental craft, the region's connection to aerospace testing led some to speculate about classified projects. But no records exist of disc-shaped craft tested in 1953 with the described capabilities. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics maintain the Santa Barbara luminous disks were likely a mix of aircraft, balloons, and misinterpretations of celestial objects, amplified by Cold War tension and the popularity of flying saucer stories. Believers, however, argue the consistency of multiple reports, the formations, and the advanced maneuvers point to genuine, unknown craft operating in the region. They note that the sightings fit the broader pattern of USO and UFO activity reported off the California coast throughout the 1950s. Connection to other UFO cases. The Santa Barbara disks were not isolated. Similar reports occurred along the Pacific coast. In 1951-52, glowing disks were reported diving into the ocean near Santa Barbara, the early USO cases. In 1953, luminous formations were seen over Los Angeles and San Diego, suggesting a wider pattern. In 1954, Europe experienced its own wave of disk sightings, including the famous Taormina photographs in Sicily. The Santa Barbara case fits squarely into this international surge, one more piece of a global puzzle. The legacy today, the Santa Barbara luminous disks of 1953 remain unexplained. No definitive photographs or military reports survive, only consistent witness testimony published in local newspapers and UFO archives. For researchers, the case represents one of the strongest formation sightings of the early 1950s, credible reports of multiple disks maneuvering in coordinated ways that defied conventional explanation. The Santa Barbara Channel, already a hotbed of USO reports, became further cemented as one of the world's UFO hotspots. Closing reflection. On quiet nights in 1953, the people of Santa Barbara looked up and saw luminous disks gliding silently above the Pacific. They hovered, regrouped, and vanished into the skies, leaving only questions in their wake. Were they aircraft, illusions, or a glimpse of technology beyond human reach? The Santa Barbara luminous disks remain a mystery of light, formation, and silence, reminders that the California coast has long been more than just a place of beauty, but also a stage for the unexplained. The Santa Barbara radar, visual UFO case, tracked in the skies, seen with the eyes in 1954, off the coast of Southern California, the mystery of the Santa Barbara Channel deepened. Navy radar operators tracked unknown targets moving at impossible speeds, while pilots and ground observers simultaneously saw glowing objects maneuvering in the skies. It was one of the first major radar, visual UFO cases in California, a convergence of technology and human sight that made denial difficult. This is the Santa Barbara radar, visual case of 1954. The setting. The Santa Barbara Channel is a narrow strip of water separating the California coast from the Channel Islands. By the 1950s, it was one of the most heavily monitored stretches of ocean in the United States. The Navy's Point Mugu Naval Air Station operated radar and patrol flights. Civilian airline routes passed directly overhead. Fishermen and residents along the coast regularly reported unusual aerial phenomena. By 1954, this region had already seen waves of strange reports, luminous disks in 1953, USO activity in 1951-52, and sightings stretching back into World War II. But in the fall of 1954, the unknown crossed from eyewitness accounts into radar records. The first radar contacts. One evening in October 1954, radar operators at Point Mugu detected multiple unidentified targets over the channel. The objects appeared suddenly, streaking across the scope at estimated speeds exceeding 1,500 miles per hour, far faster than any jet in service at the time. At times, the blips hovered motionless, only to accelerate instantly and make abrupt turns that conventional aircraft could not perform. Alarmed, operators checked for equipment malfunction. But the radar systems were functioning normally. Visual confirmation almost simultaneously, reports came in from outside the radar room. Pilots flying near the Channel Islands reported glowing disks or orbs of light maneuvering in groups. Ground observers along the coast, including military personnel, described luminous objects darting across the night sky. The timing and positions matched the radar tracks. This was no simple radar anomaly, the unknowns were visible in the skies. Coordinated maneuvers. Witnesses described multiple disks moving in formation, then breaking apart and rejoining. Some hovered silently over the water before shooting straight upward into the clouds. Radar logs confirmed the unusual movements. Targets would stop abruptly, then accelerate to extreme speeds, changing direction at sharp angles, maneuvers that would have torn conventional aircraft apart. One Navy officer later admitted, "Whatever they were, they flew rings around our best jets." Scrambled interceptors. According to later accounts, interceptors were scrambled from nearby bases, including Point Mugu and possibly March Air Force Base inland. Pilots attempted to close on the targets but reported difficulty. As soon as they approached, the objects accelerated out of range. Radar confirmed the cat-and-mouse game. Each time jets neared, the UFOs vanished from scope, only to reappear minutes later in another sector. The intercept attempts ended without contact. Official reports. The radar visual event was logged and forwarded through military channels. While not as famous as the Washington, D.C. UFO incidents of 1952, the Santa Barbara case raised similar concerns. Unknown objects were penetrating restricted military airspace. They were tracked on radar. They were seen by trained pilots and observers. For the Navy and Air Force, this was more than rumor, it was data. Possible explanations considered: 1. Radar anomalies. Atmospheric conditions can create false targets. But in this case, visual sightings matched the radar tracks. 2. Experimental aircraft. The 1950s were the dawn of supersonic flight. Could these have been classified tests? Problem: no known U.S. craft could hover, reverse, and accelerate at thousands of miles per hour in 1954. 3. Astronomical phenomena. Stars, meteors, or planets often get misreported. But radar confirmation, coordinated formations, and abrupt maneuvers ruled this out. For foreign technology. With the Cold War escalating, some speculated Soviet craft. But nothing in Soviet inventories matched the performance described. In the end, no conventional explanation fit the evidence. Why the case stands out. The Santa Barbara radar visual case is important because it involved both technology and human testimony. Radar confirmed the presence of unidentified targets. Pilots and ground observers visually saw luminous disks at the same time. Intercept attempts failed, highlighting the superiority of the unknown craft. Cases with radar visual confirmation are considered some of the strongest in UFO history, because they combine instrument data with eyewitness accounts. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue the case could have involved radar reflections, atmospheric inversions, or misidentified aircraft, amplified by Cold War nerves. Believers counter that the convergence of radar and visual confirmation, the speed estimates, and the consistency across multiple witnesses make the Santa Barbara case one of the best supported UFO incidents of the 1950s. The broader context. The radar visual incident occurred during a global surge in UFO activity. 1952, Tremonton and Salem photographs in the U.S., Washington, D.C. radar visual incidents. 1954, the Great European UFO Wave, including the Taormina photographs in Italy and mass sightings in France. The Santa Barbara case placed California's coast alongside the world's major UFO hotspots. The legacy today. The 1954 Santa Barbara radar visual UFO case is officially classified as unexplained. While less publicized than Washington, D.C. or Tremonton, it remains a cornerstone in U.S. Navy UFO files. For researchers, it reinforces the channel's reputation as a long-term hotspot for both UFO and USO phenomena. The combination of radar and visual confirmation gives it lasting weight in the annals of UFO history. Closing reflection. In 1954, as radar screens lit up at Point Mugu and luminous disks darted across the California coast, Navy officers and pilots found themselves outmatched by the unknown. Was it advanced foreign technology, experimental craft, or something beyond Earth? The Santa Barbara radar visual case endures as one of the strongest mysteries of the Cold War skies, a night when the instruments and the eyes told the same story, and the answers remain just beyond reach. The Dayton flying platform photographs, a disk above Ohio in the summer of 1952, as America reeled from waves of UFO reports across the nation, two strange photographs emerged from Dayton, Ohio, home to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and the Air Force's secretive Project Blue Book. The images appeared to show a flat, disc-like craft hovering silently in the skies over the city. Some called it a hoax. Others pointed out that Dayton, of all places, was the epicenter of UFO investigation at the time. This is the story of the Dayton flying platform, photographs of 1952, two frames that remain locked in mystery. The setting the place was Dayton, Ohio, a Midwestern city tied directly to aviation history. It was the hometown of the Wright brothers and the location of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, headquarters of Air Technical Intelligence and Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program. The date was July 1952, at the very peak of the most famous UFO wave in American history. In Washington, D.C., radar operators were tracking mysterious blips. Airline pilots were reporting glowing disks over Chesapeake Bay. Across the country, newspapers ran daily headlines about saucers. In this climate of tension, a pair of photographs from Dayton drew new attention. The photographs, the images, later dubbed the flying platform photos, show a disc-shaped object suspended in the sky. The object appears flat and circular, with a raised center. It is sharply outlined against a partly cloudy sky. No wings, tails, or contrails are visible. The two frames, taken in quick succession, show the object at slightly different angles, as if tilting or moving slowly. The images are grainy, but clear enough to suggest a structured, metallic craft. How they emerged. The photographs reportedly surfaced in Dayton newspapers in the late summer of 1952. Accounts differ as to who took them, some say an anonymous civilian photographer, others suggest an Air Force insider leaked the images. What is clear is that they were quickly connected to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, just miles away. The base was not only central to UFO investigations, but also to experimental aircraft testing. Had someone in Dayton photographed a genuine flying saucer, or a classified U.S. craft? Public reaction. The photos caused a stir when first published. Coming at the height of the 1952 UFO wave, they seemed to provide visual proof of what so many Americans were seeing in the skies. Unlike streaks of light or distant points, the Dayton images showed a solid disk. The resemblance to the classic flying saucer reports was uncanny. Newspapers referred to it as a flying platform, emphasizing its flat, circular appearance. Official attention given the location, Dayton, home of Project Blue Book. It is almost certain the photographs came to the attention of the Air Force. But no public record of an official analysis has ever been released. Blue Book files do not contain a definitive explanation, leaving researchers to speculate whether the images were dismissed, classified, or quietly buried. Explanations considered. One experimental craft. Some researchers suggest the Dayton object could have been a test vehicle from Wright-Patterson, possibly a lifting platform or early hovercraft concept. The U.S. Air Force was experimenting with flying platform prototypes in the 1950s, but none matched the disc-like design in the photographs. Two hoax or model skeptics argue the photos may show a suspended model, perhaps a hubcap or small object thrown into the air. Problem: the object appears at distance, not close to the camera, and seems too large for a handheld prop. Three-weather balloons were often used as explanations in UFO cases. But the object in the photos looks structured, with a defined rim and raised dome, not the irregular shape of a balloon. For unidentified craft. For believers, the photos are genuine evidence of disc-shaped craft operating above the very base charged with investigating UFOs. Witness testimony. The lack of a clear, named photographer has fueled doubt. But local accounts suggest the images were not taken in isolation. Several residents of Dayton claim to have seen unusual disks in the skies that summer, echoing the photograph's appearance. At the time, the region was flooded with rumors of strange aerial activity connected to Wright-Patterson. Some civilians believed the Air Force was testing captured or reverse-engineered technology. The 1952 context: the Dayton photos did not exist in a vacuum. They came during the most intense wave of UFO activity in U.S. history. July 1952, the Washington, D.C. radar, visual sightings shook the nation. July 1952, the Nash, Fortenberry pilots reported 8 glowing disks over Chesapeake Bay. July 1952, the Salem and Tremonton photographs emerged. In this environment, the Dayton photos seemed to confirm that the phenomenon was everywhere, even above the very headquarters of Air Force intelligence. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue the Dayton, flying platform, photos are most likely a hoax, simple thrown objects or darkroom trickery that fooled the public during a time of hysteria. Believers, however, stress the timing, the proximity to Wright-Patterson, and the resemblance to countless disk reports from the era. To them, the photos are consistent with the broader 1952 wave, part of a pattern the Air Force could not explain, even as it investigated from its base in Dayton. Cultural impact. Though not as famous as the McMinnville or Taormina photographs, the Dayton images circulated widely in UFO literature of the 1950s and 1960s. They were reprinted in early UFO books and magazines, often labeled as evidence of either A. Genuine saucers photographed near America's UFO headquarters, or B. Experimental Air Force craft mistaken for extraterrestrial vehicles. In either case, the photos reinforced the association of Wright-Patterson AFB with the UFO mystery. The legacy today: the Dayton, flying platform, photographs remain unexplained. No definitive debunking has ever been accepted, but no confirmation of authenticity exists either. For researchers, they are tantalizing because of their location and timing, captured in the very city where the Air Force was secretly cataloging UFO reports at the height of the saucer era. Were they hoaxes? Experimental craft? Or a genuine glimpse of the unknown? The truth remains hidden, perhaps still locked in the archives of Wright-Patterson. Closing reflection. In July 1952, as UFOs dominated American headlines, 2 photographs emerged from Dayton, Ohio, clear images of a disc-shaped craft hovering in the sky. Were they tricks of photography, glimpses of classified aircraft, or evidence of something extraordinary? The Dayton, flying platform, photographs endure as one of the Cold War's enduring mysteries, a moment when the unknown appeared above the very heart of America's UFO investigations. The Bakersfield mass sighting, a night of lights over California in the late summer of 1952, hundreds of people in California's San Joaquin Valley witnessed a formation of glowing objects crossing the night sky. Airline passengers, ground observers, and even military personnel reported the same thing: luminous discs or ovals maneuvering in groups. This is the story of the Bakersfield mass sighting, a case where the skies above a farming town lit up with mystery. The setting: the place was Bakersfield, California, a rapidly growing agricultural hub in the southern San Joaquin Valley. The date was August 1952, just weeks after UFOs over Washington, D.C. had dominated national headlines. By now, the United States was in the grip of the largest UFO wave in its history. Reports flooded in daily, from pilots, radar operators, and ordinary citizens. Against this backdrop, Bakersfield added one of the most dramatic mass sightings of the year. The first reports: the evening was clear, with stars visible across the valley. Around 9:30 p.m., residents began noticing unusual lights in the sky. Witnesses described glowing, oval-shaped objects, flying in formation. They were luminous, brighter than stars, and moved with deliberate precision. At first, a handful of people reported the lights. But soon, hundreds across Bakersfield and nearby towns were pointing at the same spectacle. The objects' descriptions were consistent: shape, disc or oval, glowing white or orange. Formation, flying in groups of 6 to 12, often in V-shaped or staggered lines. Behavior, hovering briefly, then darting away at sharp angles. Speed, faster than conventional aircraft, yet silent. One witness recalled, "They weren't shooting stars. They flew in formation like a squadron, but they glowed, and they made no sound." Multiple witnesses. The Bakersfield case stands out for its sheer number of observers. Airline passengers on commercial flights reported the lights pacing their planes. Ground observers in Bakersfield, Wasco, and Delano all described the same formations. Police officers and military personnel confirmed the sightings, lending credibility. In total, hundreds of witnesses saw the objects that night, making it one of the largest mass sightings of the 1950s. Newspaper coverage. Local newspapers quickly picked up the story. Headlines described, "Flying saucers over Bakersfield," and "Hundreds watch sky mystery." Reporters interviewed residents, who gave remarkably consistent descriptions of glowing, maneuvering objects. The press coverage added to the national frenzy already building from the Washington, D.C. radar, visual sightings just a month earlier. Project Blue Book investigation. The Air Force's UFO project, Project Blue Book, logged the Bakersfield sighting as part of the 1952 wave. Investigators noted the consistency of testimony and the scale of witnesses. But their official explanation was vague. The lights were probably aircraft or astronomical objects, seen under unusual conditions. For many, this explanation felt inadequate. How could so many trained and untrained observers mistake ordinary planes for glowing disks? Possible explanations considered: 1. Aircraft formation. Some suggested the lights were conventional planes reflecting sunlight or operating with bright landing lights. Problem: witnesses insisted the objects were silent and executed sharp turns unlike any formation of jets or propeller planes. 2. Meteors or astronomical events. Could the glowing ovals have been meteors or bright stars distorted by the atmosphere? Problem: the lights maintained steady formation and returned repeatedly, unlike meteors, which appear briefly and singly. 3. Weather balloons. Balloons were often invoked in UFO cases. But balloons drift, they do not maneuver in formations or accelerate rapidly. For unknown craft. For many researchers, the Bakersfield case represented genuine unidentified aerial objects, disks operating in coordinated groups, observed by hundreds at once. Why the case matters. The Bakersfield sighting is significant because it was a mass sighting, with hundreds of independent witnesses. Both civilians and officials confirmed the events. The objects were seen from air and ground simultaneously. It occurred during the summer of 1952, the peak of UFO activity in U.S. history. Few cases combine such scale, timing, and consistency. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue the Bakersfield lights were likely military aircraft on maneuvers or misidentified celestial phenomena. The hysteria of 1952, they claim, primed people to see flying saucers in ordinary lights. Believers point to the silence, the sharp maneuvers, and the sheer number of witnesses. With airline passengers, police officers, and residents all describing the same disks, they argue the case cannot be dismissed as mass imagination. Connection to other cases. The Bakersfield sighting fits into a larger pattern. Just weeks earlier, airline pilots Nash and Fortenberry saw 8 glowing disks over Chesapeake Bay. Days later, UFOs appeared on radar over Washington, D.C., chased by Air Force jets. That same summer, California had multiple UFO reports, including luminous formations over Los Angeles and San Diego. Bakersfield was not isolated, it was part of the national UFO wave of 1952. The legacy today, the Bakersfield mass sighting remains officially unexplained. While Blue Book's vague attribution to aircraft or stars satisfied official records, it left witnesses unconvinced. For UFO historians, the case is a classic example of a large-scale, credible mass sighting, the kind of event that demonstrates the phenomenon was not confined to single observers, but sometimes revealed itself to entire communities. Closing reflection. On a warm August night in 1952, the people of Bakersfield looked up and saw glowing disks moving silently in formation. Hundreds of eyes watched as the unknown crossed the California sky, defying simple explanation. Were they planes, illusions, or something truly extraordinary? The Bakersfield mass sighting remains one of the defining moments of the great 1952 UFO wave, a night when the mystery was not whispered by a few, but witnessed by a crowd. The Battle of Los Angeles, mystery in the wartime skies. In the early hours of February 25, 1942, anti-aircraft guns thundered across Los Angeles. Searchlights probed the night sky, civilians huddled in fear, and military crews fired round after round into the darkness. Something had been detected over the city, but what it was, no one could say. This is the story of the Battle of Los Angeles, a night when war panic and mystery collided in America's skies. The setting: the United States had entered World War II just 3 months earlier, after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Tensions along the West Coast were high. Rumors spread daily of Japanese submarines prowling offshore. Blackouts were enforced in coastal cities, and air raid sirens were tested regularly. Los Angeles, with its factories, shipyards, and booming aircraft industry, was considered a prime target for attack. By February 1942, nerves were stretched to the breaking point. The alarm shortly after 2 a.m. on February 25, radar picked up unidentified targets about 120 miles west of Los Angeles. Fearing an imminent air raid sirens wailed across the city. At 2:25 a.m., a blackout was ordered. Residents switched off lights and pulled down shades, while anti-aircraft batteries prepared to fire. By 3 a.m., searchlights swept the sky. Then, witnesses reported strange objects, glowing shapes or aircraft-like silhouettes, hovering or moving slowly above the city. Moments later, the guns opened fire. The barrage anti-aircraft batteries along the coast unleashed a torrent of fire. In all, over 1,400 shells were fired into the night sky. Tracer rounds and explosions lit up the darkness, while searchlights converged on mysterious targets. Witnesses reported seeing glowing objects caught in the beams of searchlights. Disc or balloon-like shapes drifting above the city. Multiple formations, as if more than one target was present. The barrage continued for nearly an hour. Explosions rocked neighborhoods, and shell fragments rained down onto homes, streets, and factories. Civilians cowered in fear, convinced Japanese bombers were overhead. Yet no bombs fell on the city. The aftermath: by dawn, the guns fell silent. The all-clear was sounded at 7:21 a.m. In the cold light of morning, confusion reigned. Despite the massive barrage, no wreckage was recovered. No enemy planes were shot down. No bombs had been dropped. The only damage came from the barrage itself: shattered windows, damaged property, and tragically, the deaths of at least 5 civilians, some from falling shell fragments, others from heart attacks during the chaos. Explanations: at the time officials scrambled to explain what had happened. One Japanese aircraft: at first, the Army claimed enemy planes had flown over Los Angeles, possibly launched from submarines. But no evidence of Japanese aircraft was ever found. 2 false alarm: Navy Secretary Frank Knox contradicted the Army, calling it a false alarm, triggered by nerves and misidentifications. 3 weather balloons: later explanations suggested weather balloons released near Los Angeles may have triggered the panic. But none of these explanations fully satisfied the public. Eyewitness accounts: civilians and soldiers alike gave conflicting but striking testimony. Some described formation flying, objects moving in groups across the sky. Others swore they saw a large, disc-shaped craft illuminated by searchlights, seemingly unaffected by the barrage of anti-aircraft fire. Many insisted they saw multiple unidentified objects darting in and out of the beams. A famous photograph, published in the Los Angeles Times, showed searchlights converging on a glowing object, fueling speculation that something solid had indeed been over the city. Skeptical explanations: over the decades, skeptics have argued the Battle of Los Angeles was simply a case of wartime hysteria. Radar returns may have been false echoes caused by weather conditions. Searchlights may have illuminated drifting smoke, clouds, or balloons. Anti-aircraft crews, already on edge, may have fired at nothing, a phantom raid born of nerves. In this view, The event was a tragic but understandable mistake in a city braced for attack. UFO interpretations. Believers in UFO phenomena see the event differently. They point to the massive volume of fire with no effect on the objects. Eyewitnesses describing disc-shaped craft immune to anti-aircraft shells. The famous searchlight photograph, which many interpret as showing a solid object. For UFO researchers, the Battle of Los Angeles was one of the earliest mass sightings of the saucer era, 5 years before Kenneth Arnold's famous 1947 sighting introduced the term, flying saucer. Cultural impact. The Battle of Los Angeles left a deep mark on American memory. It underscored how vulnerable the West Coast felt in the early days of World War II. It revealed how quickly fear could ignite chaos. And it became a foundation for UFO lore, linking wartime mystery with the saucer wave that would follow. The event has since inspired books, documentaries, and even Hollywood films, blending fact, speculation, and legend. The legacy today, the Battle of Los Angeles is officially explained as a false alarm, triggered by jittery radar operators and overzealous anti-aircraft crews. Yet doubts remain. Too many witnesses described objects in the sky, illuminated by searchlights, seemingly impervious to thousands of rounds of fire. Was it an enemy raid that never materialized, a tragic mistake, or a mystery from beyond? The answers remain as elusive as the glowing shapes that once drifted above the city. Closing reflection. On February 25, 1942, the skies over Los Angeles erupted in fire and fear. Searchlights locked onto glowing objects, guns roared into the night, and a city braced for destruction. But when dawn came, there were no enemy planes, no wreckage, no bombs, only questions. The Battle of Los Angeles endures as one of the great mysteries of wartime America, a night when the boundary between hysteria, warfare, and the unknown blurred in the searchlight beams above a darkened city. The Foo Fighters, mystery lights of World War II. During the Second World War, Allied and Axis pilots faced not only each other in the skies but something stranger. Night after night, aviators reported glowing orbs, fiery balls, and luminous disks that seemed to pace their aircraft, keeping perfect formation before vanishing at impossible speeds. These mysterious lights were nicknamed Foo Fighters. They appeared over Europe, the Pacific, and the Mediterranean, witnessed by hundreds of combat crews. This is the story of the Foo Fighters, one of the earliest, and most persistent, mysteries of modern aerial warfare. The setting World War II brought unprecedented advances in aviation. Aircraft flew higher, faster, and farther than ever before. Crews spent long hours over enemy territory, constantly scanning the skies for threats. It was in this crucible of fear and vigilance that the Foo Fighters appeared. By 1944, as the Allies gained air superiority over Europe, pilots began reporting glowing objects that followed them in the night sky. At first, the sightings were dismissed as nerves, but the reports grew too numerous to ignore. The first reports. The term Foo Fighter originated with the 415th Night Fighter Squadron of the U.S. Army Air Forces, stationed in France in late 1944. Pilots flying radar-equipped P-61 Black Widow night fighters began encountering mysterious lights, red, orange, or white orbs that appeared suddenly. Objects that would pace the aircraft, keeping formation no matter the maneuvers attempted. Lights that could accelerate, climb, or dive at speeds far beyond the planes of the era. At first, pilots thought they were enemy weapons, some new kind of German aircraft or guided missile. But no hostile action ever followed. The lights never attacked, they only followed. Across the European theater, reports spread quickly. Over Germany and France, B-17 bomber crews saw fiery spheres darting among formations at night. British Royal Air Force pilots encountered glowing discs that mirrored their maneuvers. Some described the Foo Fighters as Christmas tree lights in the sky. The objects were often reported in groups, sometimes appearing as small formations of orbs. They would hover, circle, or streak off at high velocity. Radar operators, in many cases, could not detect them. The objects appeared purely visual, yet consistent across multiple crews. The Pacific Theater Foo Fighters were not confined to Europe. In the Pacific, U.S. Navy and Army Air Forces pilots also reported luminous objects. Flying long missions over the ocean, crews saw glowing balls of light rise from the sea, pace their bombers, and then dart away. Japanese pilots, too, reported strange aerial lights. Post-war testimony suggested both sides believed the phenomenon was a secret weapon of the enemy. But after 1945, no evidence of such a weapon was ever found. Military investigations at the time, Allied command took the report seriously. Intelligence officers feared the Foo Fighters might represent advanced German technology, perhaps jet-powered interceptors or new guided weapons. Yet nothing in German records after the war matched the descriptions. The Luftwaffe had jet fighters like the Me-262, but these were noisy, fast, and visible on radar, not silent glowing orbs. The Foo Fighters remained an enigma. Descriptions and behavior. Pilots across theaters described the phenomenon with remarkable consistency: appearance, glowing balls, fiery spheres, or metallic discs. Colors: red, orange, yellow, or white. Size, ranging from basketball-sized orbs to objects as large as fighter planes. Maneuvers: hovering, pacing aircraft, sharp turns, sudden acceleration. Effect: never attacking, only observing. Some crews described the lights as almost playful, darting around their planes before vanishing. One pilot said, "They seemed to know every move we made. They were always one step ahead." Explanations considered one enemy weapons at the time. Many assumed Foo Fighters were German or Japanese secret weapons. But post-war intelligence revealed no such programs. St. Elmo's fire or atmospheric phenomena. Some scientists suggested Foo Fighters were electrical discharges caused by aircraft moving through charged air, similar to ball lightning. But pilots rejected this, noting the lights maneuvered independently, not fixed to their aircraft. Illusions or fatigue. Wartime stress, exhaustion, and night flying conditions might have led to hallucinations. Yet the consistency across crews, theaters, and nationalities makes this unlikely. For extraterrestrial hypothesis. For some, the Foo Fighters represent early encounters with non-human technology, observers who appeared in the skies during humanity's greatest conflict. Cultural impact. The Foo Fighter reports were widely known within the military but kept quiet from the public during the war. After 1945, journalists and veterans began publishing accounts. In the post-war years, as UFO sightings grew worldwide, Foo Fighters were retroactively seen as part of the same phenomenon. The term itself entered pop culture, inspiring books, films, and even the name of a famous rock band. Why the case endures. The Foo Fighters stand out for several reasons: global consistency, reported in Europe, the Pacific, and the Mediterranean by Allied and Axis pilots alike. Credible witnesses, experienced aviators trained to recognize aircraft and atmospheric conditions. Unexplained behavior, objects that could outmaneuver the best technology of the 1940s, yet never attacked. Unlike later UFO cases, Foo Fighters occurred in the crucible of war, when every unusual sight was scrutinized as a possible weapon. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics continue to view Foo Fighters as natural phenomena, perhaps atmospheric plasma, ball lightning, or visual illusions caused by stress and fatigue. Believers argue the consistency, the maneuverability, and the intelligence displayed suggest advanced craft, technology far beyond the 1940s. To them, Foo Fighters were the first wave of UFO encounters before the flying saucer era began in 1947. The legacy today, Foo Fighters remain officially unexplained. Military archives contain dozens of reports, but no definitive answers. For historians, they are a reminder of the chaos and fear of wartime skies. For UFO researchers, they are an early chapter in the modern mystery of the unknown. Whatever they were, the Foo Fighters of World War II continue to fascinate, glowing enigmas that haunted the skies of history's greatest conflict. Closing reflection. From Europe to the Pacific, combat crews of World War II watched glowing lights pace their aircraft, dart around formations, and vanish into the night. They called them Foo Fighters, mysterious companions in the dark skies of war. Were they secret weapons, natural phenomena, or visitors observing from beyond. The Foo Fighters remain one of the earliest and most enduring aerial mysteries, proof that even in times of war, the skies hold secrets beyond human understanding. The Nuremberg celestial phenomenon, a battle in the skies on the morning of April 14, 1561, the citizens of Nuremberg, Germany, awoke to a spectacle that defied imagination. As dawn broke, hundreds of residents reported seeing strange shapes filling the skies, crosses, spheres, cylinders, and disks, engaged in what appeared to be a celestial battle. The event was so extraordinary that it was recorded in a printed broadside, one of the earliest mass media reports of an aerial phenomenon. This is the story of the Nuremberg celestial phenomenon of 1561, an event that some describe as the first great UFO sighting of the modern era. The city of Nuremberg in the 16th century was a thriving center of commerce, learning, and printing. Known for its artisans and scholars, it was also a place where celestial signs and omens were taken seriously. Europe at the time was gripped by religious tension, with the Protestant Reformation reshaping faith and society. People looked to the heavens for signs, and on that spring morning, they believed they received one. The event, according to the broadside published by Hans Glaser, a Nuremberg printer, the phenomenon began at sunrise on April 14. Residents described seeing cylindrical shapes, like large tubes, hovering in the sky. From these tubes, spheres and disks emerged, some red, some black, some blood-colored. Crosses, crescents, and rods also appeared, filling the heavens. The objects moved as if in combat, engaging in a great aerial struggle. Witnesses said the sky seemed alive with motion. Some objects clashed, others broke apart. The battle continued for more than an hour. Eventually, the smaller shapes seemed to weaken and fall toward the earth. Some crashed into the fields outside the city, where smoke was seen rising. The broadside report, Hans Glaser's woodcut broadside, published just days later, gave us the most enduring record of the event. The woodcut depicts dozens of shapes in the sky above Nuremberg, spheres, crosses, rods, and a massive black spear-like object looming on the horizon. The text describes the dreadful apparition as a sign from God, warning the people to repent. Glaser interpreted the event through the lens of faith, as a divine message of judgment. Yet the details, structured shapes, aerial combat, objects falling to the earth, read strikingly like a modern UFO report. Witness testimony. While no first-hand diaries from the day survive, the broadside states that many men and women of Nuremberg witnessed the spectacle. Some reported hearing loud bangs or crashes as objects collided. Others claimed to see glowing orbs darting between the larger shapes. The consistency of descriptions, across a large population, suggested something extraordinary had been seen. Explanations at the time in 1561, science as we know it did not exist. The event was interpreted within the worldview of the time, a warning from God, calling for repentance and faith. A heavenly battle, echoing biblical imagery of angels and demons fighting in the skies. A cosmic omen, signaling coming wars or disasters on earth. For the people of Nuremberg, the celestial phenomenon was not simply unusual, it was deeply symbolic. Modern explanations considered centuries later, historians and researchers have offered several possible explanations. One, astronomical or atmospheric phenomena. Some suggest the event was caused by a parhelion, or sun dog, an optical effect where ice crystals in the atmosphere create bright halos and shapes around the sun. However, the descriptions of moving, clashing objects go beyond typical parhelion accounts. 2. Mass hallucination or exaggeration. Skeptics argue that panic, religious fervor, or misinterpretation of natural events led to exaggerated reports. 3. Meteor showers. Some believe the event may have been a meteor shower or multiple bolides streaking across the morning sky. The falling objects and smoke could match meteoric activity. For early UFO encounter. For some UFO researchers, the Nuremberg phenomenon is one of history's earliest mass sightings of structured craft, disks, cylinders, and spheres behaving in ways eerily similar to 20th-century reports. Connection to Basel, 1566. Just 5 years later, in Basel, Switzerland, another mass celestial event was reported. Citizens described black spheres moving across the sunrise, clashing with each other, and vanishing. Like Nuremberg, the Basel phenomenon was recorded in a woodcut broadside. Together, the two events are sometimes called the celestial battles of the 16th century. Cultural and historical impact. The Nuremberg phenomenon entered history not only as an unexplained aerial sighting, but also as a reflection of its era. It shows how people in the 16th century interpreted unexplained events through religion and symbolism. It highlights the role of the printing press in spreading extraordinary news to a wide audience. And it provides one of the earliest detailed illustrations of what modern eyes interpret as a UFO encounter. The event remains unique: a large population, a detailed contemporary account, and a vivid woodcut image still studied today. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics emphasize natural causes, atmospheric optics, sun dogs, or meteor activity, magnified by 16th century superstition. Believers argue the structured shapes, the battle in the sky, and the resemblance to modern UFO reports cannot be dismissed. To them, the Nuremberg event is proof the UFO phenomenon has been with humanity far longer than the modern era. The legacy today, the Nuremberg celestial phenomenon of 1561 is preserved as one of the earliest and most detailed UFO cases in history. The woodcut of Hans Glaser still captivates researchers, historians, and UFO enthusiasts alike. Whether natural, symbolic, or extraterrestrial, the event remains a testament to humanity's long fascination with the skies. Closing reflection. On April 14, 1561, the people of Nuremberg awoke to a sky alive with crosses, discs, and spheres locked in a mysterious battle. For them, it was a warning from God. For us, it is a puzzle across time, a mass sighting centuries before the saucer era. Was it a natural wonder, a product of imagination, or the first great UFO encounter of the modern age? The Nuremberg celestial phenomenon endures as a haunting reminder that the skies have always carried mysteries beyond human understanding. The Basel celestial phenomenon, black spheres at dawn. In the summer of 1566, the citizens of Basel, Switzerland, awoke to a spectacle that defied explanation. For 3 consecutive days, strange dark spheres filled the skies at sunrise. They darted, clashed, and moved as though engaged in combat, before vanishing into nothing. This is the Basel celestial phenomenon, a 16th century mystery that echoes across centuries, recorded in print and preserved in history. The setting. The city of Basel, in northern Switzerland, was a prominent cultural and trading hub of the 16th century. Known for its printers, scholars, and artists, it was also a place where celestial events were taken as divine signs. Europe was in the throes of religious upheaval. The Protestant Reformation had reshaped much of the continent, and superstition mingled with early science in how people interpreted the heavens. When the skies over Basel filled with strange spheres in August 1566, the event was seen not only as a marvel, but as a warning. The event. According to a printed broadside by local printer Samuel Coccius, the phenomenon unfolded on August 7, 1566, just after sunrise. Dozens of black spheres appeared in the sky. They moved quickly, darting across the sun, clashing with one another in what witnesses described as a kind of aerial battle. The spheres seemed to fight for hours, until many faded or vanished. Some were said to turn red and fiery before dissolving. Over the following days, the spectacle repeated itself. Coccius reported multiple mornings of strange activity, as though the skies themselves were at war. The broadside report. Coccius's printed broadside, illustrated with woodcuts, remains our primary source. The image shows dozens of dark spheres dotting the sky above Basel, clustered around the sun. The accompanying text described a large number of black globes rising before the sun. These globes, battling each other, with movements like soldiers in combat. A spectacle that lasted several hours. Like the Nuremberg broadside 5 years earlier, the Basel account interpreted the event as a divine warning, urging citizens to repent and fear God's judgment. Eyewitness experience. Coccius noted that many men and women of Basel witnessed the event. Some described the spheres as moving with incredible speed, as if they were running one against the other. Others insisted they saw spheres vanish in flashes of light or burn up like embers. The consistency of testimony gave the event weight. It was not a single observer or a fleeting glance, but a mass sighting over several mornings. Possible explanations at the time. In the worldview of 1566, the meaning was clear: the black spheres were signs of divine anger. The battle in the sky reflected the turmoil of Earth, especially religious conflict in Europe. The spectacle was a cosmic omen, urging repentance. For the people of Basel, the celestial phenomenon was not simply unexplained, it was symbolic, a message from heaven itself. Modern explanations considered centuries later, historians and scientists have offered natural explanations. One, atmospheric and astronomical phenomena. Some suggest the spheres were sunspots, visible to the naked eye under certain conditions at sunrise. Sunspots appear as dark patches on the solar disk. However, the descriptions of rapid movement and aerial combat go beyond static sunspots. 2. Optical illusions. Atmospheric refraction, unusual cloud formations, or partial solar halos could have produced strange visual effects, magnified by dawn light. 3. Meteors or bolides. Some accounts of objects burning up suggest a meteor shower, though meteors do not appear as dozens of slow-moving spheres. For mass misinterpretation, it is possible that natural effects, such as migrating birds silhouetted against the sun, were interpreted symbolically and exaggerated into battle-like descriptions. 5. Proto-UFO phenomenon. For UFO researchers, the Basel event is part of a continuum, structured aerial objects, behaving in ways eerily similar to modern UFO reports, long before the flying saucer era. Connection to Nuremberg, 1561. The Basel phenomenon came only 5 years after the famous Nuremberg celestial event of 1561, in which citizens described crosses, spheres, and cylinders fighting in the skies over Germany. Both were recorded in broadsides with vivid illustrations. Both described aerial battles of structured shapes. Together, they form one of the earliest patterns of mass aerial sightings in European history. Cultural and historical impact. The Basel broadside is valuable not only for its content, but for what it reveals about the time. It shows how 16th-century Europeans interpreted unexplained events through religious and moral frameworks. It demonstrates the power of the printing press in documenting and preserving extraordinary events. And it highlights how people, centuries before modern science, struggled to make sense of the unknown. The woodcut image of spheres dotting the sun remains iconic, often reprinted in UFO histories as a precursor to the modern mystery. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue the Basel phenomenon was most likely an exaggerated description of natural events, sunspots, atmospheric optics, or migratory birds against the rising sun. Believers emphasize the striking similarities to modern UFO reports: luminous orbs maneuvering, engaging in apparent combat, and vanishing suddenly. To them, the Basel account is not superstition, but an early mass UFO sighting. The legacy today, the Basel celestial phenomenon of 1566 is remembered alongside the Nuremberg event as one of the most detailed pre-modern UFO reports. Though officially unexplained, the accounts and woodcuts endure in history as vivid records of humanity's long struggle to understand the skies. Whether natural, symbolic, or technological, the Basel event remains a mystery that links the 16th century to the UFO stories of our own time. Closing reflection. On August mornings in 1566, the people of Basel watched as black spheres filled the dawn sky. They darted, clashed, and vanished, a battle above the city, burned into memory and print. Was it sunspots, birds, meteors, or something far stranger? The Basel celestial phenomenon endures as a haunting echo from the past, proof that long before radar, jets, or cameras, humanity looked to the heavens and saw mysteries it could not explain. The ghost rockets, Sweden's mystery missiles of 1946. In the summer of 1946, just a year after the end of World War II, Scandinavia faced a new kind of aerial mystery. Across Sweden, Norway, and Finland, thousands of people reported strange objects streaking across the sky. They looked like missiles, but unlike any known weapon. Some crashed into lakes. Others maneuvered in ways no rocket could. The press called them ghost rockets. This is the story of the 1946 ghost rocket wave, a phenomenon that left governments baffled and historians still searching for answers. The setting Europe in 1946 was tense and fragile. The Second World War had ended only months before, and the Cold War was just beginning. Sweden, officially neutral, found itself on edge. The Soviet Union was testing captured German technology, and fears of new secret weapons were widespread. Scandinavia's skies, long quiet, suddenly became the stage for something extraordinary. The first reports came in May 1946, but by July and August they surged. Objects described as long, missile-like shapes streaked across the sky. Many had bright flames or glowing tails, like meteors, yet they traveled horizontally rather than downward. Some were seen maneuvering, making turns or slowing down. Witnesses included civilians, military personnel, and airline pilots. At first, authorities thought they were meteors. But the reports quickly multiplied, and the descriptions grew harder to explain away. Numbers and scale. By the end of 1946, Swedish authorities had logged over 2,000 reports of ghost rockets. More than 200 cases were deemed credible by investigators. At least 30 reports included objects seen landing or crashing, often into lakes. Witnesses described objects buzzing, exploding silently, or disintegrating mid-air. It was one of the first modern UFO waves, predating Roswell by a year. Government response. The Swedish Air Force took the report seriously. A special team was created to investigate. Radar stations were put on alert. Military pilots were dispatched to intercept the objects. Search teams combed lakes where ghost rockets were said to have crashed. Yet no wreckage was ever found. Divers searched repeatedly, but the lakes revealed nothing. No engines, no fragments, no debris. Witness accounts. The consistency of reports was striking. A Swedish Air Force officer described a metallic object, like a rocket, but flying level, not falling. Civilians saw cigar-shaped craft gliding silently before vanishing. Fishermen in remote lakes claimed objects splashed down without a trace. One observer said, "It had no wings, no sound. It moved like a machine, not like a meteor." Explanations considered. Investigators considered several possibilities. One, meteor showers. The summer of 1946 coincided with meteor activity. But meteors do not fly horizontally, make turns, or land silently in lakes. 2, Soviet missiles. The leading theory at the time was that the USSR was testing captured V-1 or V-2 rockets over Scandinavia. Yet such tests would have left debris, and Soviet ranges were far from Sweden. No evidence supported this idea. 3, psychological panic. Some skeptics suggested war nerves led people to misinterpret natural phenomena. But the sheer volume of reports, many from trained observers, weakens this argument. For unknown craft. For some researchers, the ghost rockets represent the first large-scale post-war UFO wave, structured, intelligent craft operating beyond known human technology. Military secrecy. The Swedish military classified many reports, fueling speculation. Declassified documents later revealed, Swedish authorities admitted they had no explanation. They privately ruled out both meteors and Soviet missiles. Some officials suggested the objects showed signs of intelligent control. Still, nothing was shared with the public at the time. Citizens were told the lights were meteors or weather phenomena. The role of the United States. The ghost rocket reports soon reached American intelligence. The newly formed U.S. military, already concerned about Soviet weapons, studied the incidents. Reports were sent to the Pentagon and later referenced in early UFO investigations, including Project Sign and Project Grudge. For American officials, Sweden's skies seemed to confirm that something unknown was flying in post-war Europe. Why the case stands out. The ghost rockets are unique for several reasons: scale, thousands of reports across multiple countries. Credible witnesses, pilots, military officers, and civilians. Physicality, objects reportedly crashed into lakes or disintegrated in the sky. Timing, the wave occurred before Roswell, before flying saucers entered popular culture. Unlike later UFO cases, the ghost rockets were framed not as extraterrestrial visitors, but as a potential security threat in the early Cold War. Skeptics versus believers. Skeptics argue the ghost rockets were a mix of meteors, misidentified aircraft, and Cold War paranoia. They stress that no wreckage was ever recovered, despite extensive searches. Believers, however, point out the maneuvering, the horizontal flight paths, and the sheer volume of reports. They argue the ghost rockets were advanced craft, whether Soviet, secret Allied projects, or something not of this earth. Legacy and influence. The 1946 ghost rocket wave influenced everything that followed. It demonstrated that governments would treat aerial mysteries as military intelligence problems. It foreshadowed the American UFO wave of 1947, including the Kenneth Arnold sighting and Roswell. It introduced the idea of objects entering and exiting water, a theme that recurs in modern USO, unidentified submerged object, reports. For Sweden, the ghost rockets remain the nation's most famous UFO mystery. Closing reflection. In the summer of 1946, the skies over Scandinavia came alive with strange objects, rockets that glowed, maneuvered, and fell into lakes without a trace. Were they meteors, Soviet tests, or the first wave of modern UFOs? The ghost rockets of Sweden remain one of the most perplexing aerial mysteries of the post-war world, a reminder that the modern UFO era began not in Roswell, but in the northern skies of Europe.